Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
It's 12 noon and a very good afternoon to you. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst and coming up for you this hour. What future for Scotland? What future for the United Kingdom? The question's already being asked about whether the issue of Scottish independence has been decided by Nicola Sturgeon's departure. A party, the SNP, meeting tonight to decide a way forward. And who takes them there? Kate Forbes, Angus Robertson, John Swinney, some of the names in the frame. But what's the bigger picture? Their leader in Westminster, Stephen Flynn, says they may need to even rethink the path to independence. The latest from Edinburgh and London coming up. The owners of British gas Centrica making billions in profits from soaring oil and gas prices after they were criticised for forcibly installing prepayment meters for their poorest customers. What price our energy, as critics say the whole market is broken? And the fallout as Lancashire police are criticised for now revealing missing mum Nicola Bulley had significant issues with alcohol while also struggling with the menopause. But would an earlier explanation have prevented all the harmful media and online speculation that has so upset her family and friends? What's your view on that and all the other stories? Don't forget to let us know at gbviews@gbnews.uk, especially, of course, if you're north of the border. Do you feel that your politics are heading south? Before that, latest news headlines, though, with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just gone midday. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon's unexpected decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for the leadership race. Possible replacements, as you've been hearing, include the Deputy First Minister John Swinney and Finance Secretary Kate Forbes. The government has announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment. The new funding will be given to 151 councils in England to recruit more staff, improve recovery for support for prison leavers and invest in addiction treatment. Ministers say the plans could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths every year. The Undersecretary for Primary Care and Public Health, Neil O'Brien, says it will also help cut crime.
We know that drug addiction drives so much crime. It drives about half of all crime. And because we know that if people get into drug treatment, that radically reduces their likelihood that they will be out there causing chaos and causing crime. And so we're making this big investment that will mean more people in treatment, new types of treatment. And as well as being good for all the rest of us and cutting crime, of course, it's a path out of terrible, terrible addiction for people who are trapped in it.
Labour has pledged to recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. The Shadow Home Secretary criticised the Home Office for a collapse in leadership on policing. Well, our political reporter Olivia Utley joins us live now from central London. Olivia, Yvette Cooper also unveiled Labour's proposed neighbourhood policing guarantee. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so Yvette Cooper spent essentially the first half of today's speech attempting to diagnose why antisocial behaviour is still blighting Britain's streets. And her conclusion essentially was that the police are buckling under needless bureaucracy and ancient IT systems. Her solution is, as you say, to upgrade technology across police forces and to introduce those 13,000 new police officers, bobbies on the beat really, to sort the issue at the heart. There was a big question mark over whether the funding model actually makes sense, whether the numbers add up. But if that funding model was a little bit murky, the political message certainly wasn't. It was, we are Blairites, we're centrists, we're tough on crime and we're tough on the causes of crime.
Our political reporter Olivia Utley there for us. Thank you very much, Olivia. British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion, more than triple what it made the year before. It comes after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davies called the announcement a betrayal for British gas customers and called on the government to implement a proper windfall tax. Meanwhile, 1 in 3 small businesses might not be able to cover their energy bills from April when the price guarantee rises. It's expected to increase by 20%. At the same time, government will phase down its support for firms. New research by Experian has found around 30% of the 1.2 million small businesses it analysed will be at heightened risk of collapse come the spring. MPs and campaign groups have criticised Lancashire Police for its handling of the case of missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley. Yesterday, detectives revealed Miss Bulley was vulnerable, classed as high risk, and disclosed her issues with alcohol, linked to her struggles with the menopause. The 45-year-old disappeared almost 3 weeks ago. Tory MP Alicia Kearns says she's deeply uncomfortable with this level of personal detail. But underwater rescue expert Peter Faulding, who's been involved in the search, says the police aren't to blame.
I still feel so sorry for them that it's been released this way. It should never have come out. They could have just told us on the quiet. Press wouldn't have known. No, we would just been changed everything. I feel so, like I said, the police are getting beaten up here. This is terrible because it's not the police. It's just the comms piece where whoever's made these decisions needs to answer lots of questions. Let's not knock the police. Let's not knock the family. Let's regroup, get together, and then redo this search again so we actually try and get some closure for this poor family.
The number of people who've died following major earthquakes that struck southern Turkey and northern Syria has risen to almost 42,000. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Authority says more than 4,300 aftershocks have hit the country since the initial quake. It's been 10 days since the disaster first struck, and rescue efforts are continuing. Yesterday, a 13-year-old boy was pulled from the rubble alive after being trapped for 228 hours. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Thank you very much, Bethany. So those political shockwaves from Bute House and Edinburgh yesterday still reverberating across the United Kingdom. After 8 years in power, of course, Nicola Sturgeon resigning as First Minister, with her SNP party already preparing to decide on her successor. But more importantly, perhaps, decide what exactly they're going to do about independence. The SNP National Executive Committee meeting tonight to decide on the timetable for that leadership election. Well, the candidates in the frame, including Deputy First Minister John Swinney, of course a veteran who led the SNP between 2000 and 2004, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, who's currently on maternity leave, and the Health Secretary Yousaf, who is also in the top three. Well, let's get more from Edinburgh with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. With Darren, the leadership election gun being fired tonight, it seems, at this meeting at 6:30. But the bigger question about what they do about independence. And on that matter, Stephen Flynn, who's the leader of the party in Westminster, saying, let's hold on a minute and let's actually decide where we're going to go first.
Yeah, really fascinating, Mark, isn't it? This big shock announcement, literally 24 hours ago, all the attention on Nicola Sturgeon resigning. But as always with the way with politics, is that the attention moves on to who's going to take over next, and those big questions about what does it mean for the SNP, what does it mean for Scottish independence, and indeed what does it mean for the rest of the UK. Let's talk about the SNP leadership first of all, which, as you say, is going to see the National Executive meet a little later on this evening. They're expected to set out the timetable for that leadership election. Lots of those names floating around. It seems that the two frontrunners at the moment are Angus Robinson, who was the SNP leader down in Westminster a couple of years ago before he lost his seat, someone who's clearly got an awful lot of experience, had his problems in the past, it must be said, or indeed Kate Forbes. She's young, pretty inexperienced, I would suggest, though is seen as a massive rising star. She's the finance secretary here, though someone who's socially conservative and very much in a different end of the spectrum from Nicola Sturgeon. But you're right in saying the big question that's going to face them is what do they do about this potential second referendum that clearly they're working towards, or that at least should be the strategy. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, I think one of the reasons she resigned yesterday, Mark, is that the SNP are massively backed in a corner over this. They cannot seem to work out a strategy of how to achieve it. Nicola Sturgeon had suggested using the Westminster election next year as a de facto second referendum. There was due to be a mass meeting of the SNP next month to decide if that was the strategy and the way forward. It's something that had divided the party, and it now looks that that meeting's going to be postponed. But at the moment, they are boxed in. The UK Supreme Court has slapped them down. The UK Parliament's clearly not going to give them a pathway to a second referendum, and that is going to be a really, really difficult task for whoever takes over.
Is that why Stephen Flynn himself has not put his hat in the ring? I mean, he's the one suggesting this special conference need to be delayed to try and work out what they do next. I mean, is this, a moment of sort of existential questions for the SNP?
Yeah, I think it is, in the sense that do they continue to push this constitutional question at a time in which support for independence has somewhat fallen, at a time in which actually many Scottish voters would prefer the governing party, the First Minister, to focus on the cost of living crisis here, the crisis in the healthcare system, the fact that educational attainment levels are nowhere at the target set by them. I think in terms of the practicalities of someone from Westminster trying to become First Minister, the leader of the SNP, are quite difficult in the sense that this is the power base, Edinburgh, not Westminster, for the SNP, and thus I think it's not likely to be anyone who is currently a member of Parliament. It is going to be someone who is an MSP, and I think that's the reason he's ruled himself out. But be in no doubt, Nicola Sturgeon's popularity over the last couple of years has undoubtedly papered over some of the cracks within the party. There are deep divisions about what the strategy should be. Clearly, Alex Salmond is someone who's not been on the same page. He's left the party, but for a whole load of reasons. But he's been a critical voice, and there are critical voices inside. And I suspect during this leadership contest, we'll see some of those divisions bubble to the surface.
And it's interesting now that the focus is very much on issues within Scotland, the state of the health service, the drug problems, poverty and social immobility, and even the problems within Nicola Sturgeon's own constituency in Glasgow.
Yeah, as I say, I think there has been a sense of frustration that politics here over the last 10 years or so have been defined essentially by the big constitutional question. Many feel that that was, of course, settled back in 2014 when Remain, or the unity of the UK, came out on top. There are others who will point to the fact that the SNP have continually won elections based on democratically, that is where Scotland is at. But in the end, I think across the board, most people would also prefer the government to be focusing, as you say, on some of those key tasks. In saying that, Nicola Sturgeon's resignation is clearly a blow to the SNP. It is clearly a blow to the independence movement. She is a very capable political operator, a very capable communicator, a very capable advocate for Scottish independence. I think there's been a recognition from politicians across the board, across the UK, of the significance she's played, apart from one who's not from the UK, Mark, who's also intervened, I must say, in the last couple of hours or so, and that is Donald Trump. He said that the wonderful people of Scotland are much better off without Nicola Sturgeon. He said, good riddance to the failed woke extremist Nicola Sturgeon of Scotland. Donald Trump, of course, has got golf courses here, hence, I think, his interest in internal Scottish politics.
And of course, he's still got his Scottish golf courses, which I think he's still very much in favour of. However, that's a different issue. Darren, for the moment, at Holyrood, thank you for that. But let's reflect now on how the public have been reacting to her departure and what happens next. Our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, joins us in Dumfries. And, of course, just to explain to people, Tony, this is true blue in terms of Tory support. And, therefore, all these questions that the other political parties are trying to work out, what does this mean for them? Will it mean extra Labour seats? Will there be, perhaps, a Tory resurgence?
Well, I think that's kind of a big question for the people of Dumfries. Certainly the people that I spoke to today, you know, there was quite a mix of reactions. A lot of people didn't like to see anybody making a resignation, especially not on the back of what wasn't particularly one huge issue, but certainly a grinding down of Nicola Sturgeon. But yeah, a lot of people that I've spoke to this morning were, you know, quite happy to turn the page with such a dominant force as Nicola Sturgeon leading the Parliament. You know, a lot of the views here for the people in Dumfries and Galloway might not quite have felt that they were getting heard. One of the people that I spoke to today was very much quite happy about her hardline stance on Brexit, shifting away with her, but of course, you know, SNP as a party, not particularly in favour of Brexit anyway. A few more people, as I said, were quite sad to see her go. She was an iconic figure, not only in Scottish politics, but here in Dumfries and Galloway, an interesting little nugget of information is that the MP here is David Mundell, former Scottish Secretary down in Westminster, and his son, Oliver Mundell, is the MSP representing this area. So since about 2005, Conservatives have pretty much been able to represent this area of Scotland, and I think they are more than happy to see what comes next for Scotland. And
yeah, I was going to ask you, what about this issue of independence, therefore, and whether this is now really going to be the burning issue for people, or whether they've decided, you know, we've gone through all the arguments, the vote's been had, let's move on.
Yeah, I think certainly the pro-independence campaign, not just people today, but yesterday, the sentiment was, one gentleman told me outside Bute House that was it was dead, the mandate dies with Nicola Sturgeon leaves office. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know particularly whether SNP can continue on with the strength. There is still strong support for independence in Scotland, not as strong as the opposition to it. But, you know, in her entire time in office, those numbers, 45% against 55% in favour of remaining part of the UK, haven't really shifted all that much, apart from the odd poll here and there. Certainly, I think that the people in Dumfries voted against independence then. I certainly think down here, with the exception of Moray, where it was exceptionally close, you know, there was a good turnout here for Remain in terms of Leave in terms of Brexit. And I think that, you know, the political divide, certainly, I don't think it even has anything to do with how close this area is to England. But certainly, in terms of Scotland, some quite different views that you won't see represented in places like the Central Belt.
But all views being brought here on GB News, of course. Tony, thank you very much for updating us in Dumfries. Just to remind you, the latest monthly average figures of political support in Scotland: SNP at 43%, Labour on 30%, Conservatives 16%, Lib Dems on 6%. And, of course, we'll continue to monitor the position with that meeting tonight, and then see where we go with the whole issue of the United Kingdom or not. Let's update you now on the Nicola Bulley story, after Lancashire police were accused of not divulging enough information about their investigation into her disappearance, now being accused of telling the public too much about the missing mother of two, because they've revealed that she'd previously suffered with significant issues, as they said, with alcohol, and had been struggling too with the effects of the menopause. Well, the force disclosed they'd previously visited her home 3 weeks before she disappeared over concerns for her welfare. Well, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, called the revelations very unusual. Well, Sophie Reaper joins us now. She's been following the story, of course, for us throughout. And, Sophie, yet more reaction, but sort of going the other way now, if you like.
Absolutely, and to be quite honest, it's been controversial both ways. It seems that Lancashire Police can't win. At that press conference yesterday at Lancashire Police HQ, they told us that the moment Nicola was reported as a missing person, she was graded as high risk. And initially they told us that that was because of specific vulnerabilities, but they said they couldn't tell us what those vulnerabilities were because it was private to the family. But then yesterday evening, it seems they had a change of heart, because then they put out a statement which explained more about what those vulnerabilities are. They say they did that because they wanted to avoid the rife speculation that has continued throughout this investigation. Now, I'll just read you a little bit of that statement that they put out yesterday evening. They said, "Sadly, it's clear from speaking to Paul and the family that Nicola had in the past suffered with some significant issues with alcohol, which were brought on by her ongoing struggles with the menopause, and that these struggles had resurfaced over recent months. This caused some real challenges for Paul and the family. As a result of those issues, a response car staffed by both police and health professionals attended a report of concern for welfare at Nicola's home address on January 10th. No one has been arrested in relation to this incident, but it is being investigated." Now, what's interesting there is that home visit came just 17 days before Nicola went missing on the 27th of January, so around 2.5 weeks before that day that she initially disappeared. So as we reach that 3-week point, it's going to be 3 weeks tomorrow, Lancashire Police are going to be facing some difficult questions. For one, why has this information not been revealed sooner? We know that Peter Faulding has been on GB News this morning, and he said on social media that had they been aware of that, SGI and his search team, it would have significantly affected the way they carried out their search. Another big question, perhaps the biggest question of them all, is can these vulnerabilities that we now know more about, can these perhaps be linked to exactly what's happened to Nicola Bulley?
Clearly for a family, they're still awaiting any kind of news or breakthrough. What do we know about the investigations, the searches that we've seen in the river and on the banks and the footpaths and so on?
Well, as far as we know, the investigation continues as it did before. There's been a lot of criticism about the number of resources that Lancashire Police have put into this. One side saying that they've put in too much, and one side saying that they haven't put in enough. One thing that they were keen to reiterate yesterday in the press conference, though, is although that main hypothesis remains to be that Nicola sadly fell into the River Wyre, they were keen to say that that doesn't mean it's the only line of investigation. There are other lines of investigation that they're currently working on. It's just that she went in the river is currently the main working hypothesis.
Sophie, as ever, thank you for updating us. More, of course, from the search as it continues, and Lancashire Police updating us too. Thank you very much indeed. Let's just bring you a bit of breaking news we're getting from Russia concerning the latest death of someone falling from a window in some height, and it is yet again someone linked to Vladimir Putin. This is Marina Yankina, a defence official linked to Putin, who's plunged 160 feet to her death from a 16th floor tower block window. The latest high-ranking figure, of course, to die in such circumstances. Discovered by a passer-by at the entrance to the block in St. Petersburg. She was head of the Financial Support Department at the Ministry of Defence for the Western Military District, closely involved in the funding of the invasion into Ukraine. Russian Investigative Committee and the press service of the district confirming her death and probing her mystery fall. That's the phrase that they're being used. More on that, of course, as we get it. Also coming up, we'll be turning up the heat on Centrica with record profits. Yes, it's the firm that owns British Gas. All that coming up after the weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Lots of cloud around today. The winds are going to be the big feature of the weather tonight, and particularly tomorrow morning across parts of the north. We have Met Office yellow warnings in place. That's because of this area of low pressure deepening, intensifying as it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at the squeeze in the isobars. Those winds really picking up, especially through Friday morning. More on that in a moment. Let's get through the rest of today. As I said, a lot of cloud out there. Some drizzly conditions over parts of eastern England, clearing away, the odd spot of drizzle elsewhere, but also something a bit brighter developing. Parts of East Wales, North East England may well see some sunny spells before more rain pushes back into Northern Ireland. It's pretty mild out there today, double digits almost across the board, and with a bit of brightness we could get into the teens. During this evening, that rain is going to spread from Northern Ireland into western Scotland, where it will last all night. The rain getting heavier and heavier through the night as that low pressure moves in. The winds also then steadily increasing, really picking up after midnight across the northwest. Further south, well, it'll get a bit breezy. It stays cloudy. Look at these overnight temperatures, very mild indeed. We won't feel mild tomorrow in the winds. Now, those winds really whipping up tomorrow morning across Scotland initially, but also down across parts of northern England. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, particularly for high-sided vehicles, but could all cause some flying debris, certainly some disruption to the transport networks. Planes, flights may be cancelled. So very blustery day across the north with showers in the far north. Again, further south, many places just dry and cloudy, but it will be windier than today. And we could at times see a little bit of rain in the southwest. Another very mild day across the south. Further north, it will be a colder day, despite a bit more sunshine, but obviously feeling a lot colder with those winds. Now, those winds will be easing through the afternoon and into the evening. A bit more rain coming into the northwest as we go through Friday evening. More details on the weather warnings on the Met Office website. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you're about to turn to the gas hob to make your lunch, well, don't turn it up too much, perhaps. British gas owners Centrica reporting underlying annual profits of £2.8 billion, up from £392 million in 2021. And, of course, with thousands of British households struggling with their rising gas and electric bills, it sparked, if you pardon the fun, renewed calls for energy firms to pay more tax. But what's the real position? Let's get the picture now with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. And wait for it, it's worth waiting for. And let's say right at the outset, this confusion people have got between Centrica and British Gas and exactly what they think they've been paying for with their bills.
I've seen national newspapers, Mark, on their websites this morning misreporting this. It is a little bit complicated, so bear with me and I'll explain the basics of these account statements today from a very, very important British company. Yeah. So let's have a look at some graphics here and GB News radio listeners can follow what I say. So Centrica is the overall company. And Centrica have got all, they're what's called an upstream company. They explore in the North Sea and so on. And they made profits in 2021 of 948 million. In 2022, because gas prices and oil prices were so much higher, they made profits of 3,300 million. That's 3.3 billion, a massive increase. But these are the operating profits, right? That includes the sale of a series of businesses called Spirit Energy. If you take those sales away, you get the underlying profits, which is the next slide. They're slightly smaller, but still a massive increase from 392 million in 2021, Mark, to 2,800 million, 2.8 billion in 2022. That's the number that most people are going with, but there's still some confusion about it. And of course, a massive proportionate increase from 392 million to 2,800 million. Then there's British Gas itself, which is the retail customer-facing company. And so we've got a little picture there of a gas hob. Their profits actually went down, right? From 2021, they were 118 million. And in 2022, they were 72 million. And that's because people are just using less gas, right? That isn't just people sitting at home watching and listening to GB News, making their baked beans on toast for their lunch. This is also companies. That includes, you know, wholesale purchases of energy, the likes of pubs, factories and so on, many of which I've visited over recent weeks trying to highlight this story. So that's the underlying confusion. Centrica, massive profits. They're the company that explore in the North Sea. British Gas, though, the retail arm of it, their profits are still chunky, but they've come down quite a bit.
Way down, about 39%. And they're also saying they've what they said, a voluntary donation to help support customers, some £75 million. But inevitably, Rachel Reeves from Labour saying it means we've got to have a proper windfall tax. However, if the British Gas figures are down, and you can only charge the windfall tax, of course, on what's made here in the UK. That's right. How much is that actually going to raise?
Well, Centrica are saying, in their defence, they're paid £1 billion in tax on their 3.3 billion of underlying profits operating profits in 2022. And of course, windfall tax means that under certain circumstances, these oil and gas exploration companies in the North Sea, they're paying 60% of their profit. They already pay, corporation tax is 19%, oil and gas companies already pay 40% in the North Sea. That's gone up to 60% with the supplementary tax. So people in the Treasury, and I imagine people close to Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt in number 10 and 11 would say these big companies are already paying a lot of extra tax. But if all of us know our direct debits have gone absolutely nuts. And here's the thing, Mark, in April, right, that energy price cap is going to go up from $2,500 a year to $3,000 a year for the average bill. So even though wholesale oil and gas prices have been coming down, direct debits may actually go up. And it's going to be very, very, very difficult to explain that to ordinary people.
And is that also going to be difficult for them to explain when actually, when you look, they pay, 300 million back in a share buyback, which is normally an indication we've got so much money we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, so they've been dividending their shareholders, and then they do what's called a share buyback, where the company uses some of its surplus cash to buy back its own shares at a premium as a kind of reward to existing shareholders. It does... it's not a good look to be doing a share buyback when you're Centrica, when oil and gas bills, and particularly utility bills, are so high on the political agenda. And then when, congratulations to our journalistic rivals, if you like, at the Times for that incredible sting where they showed that companies acting on behalf of British Gas were forcefully installing prepayment meters. British Gas we must say this, Mark, British Gas say they've launched a full independent investigation.
Because that was a third-party company.
Because that was a third-party company, and they've suspended the use of that company. But still, a story of our times. And in April, it has to be the case, in my view, that Jeremy Hunt, in his March 15th budget, does something to change that energy price cap going up in April, and also does something more, I would suspect, to tax operations of oil and gas companies like Centrica in the North Sea.
OK, we'll let them get back to turning up the gas for their baked beans. Thank you very much indeed. And more reaction, of course, to come on that. More reaction to come too on Labour, promising thousands more police on the streets to combat rising knife crime. How will they be doing that? We'll be asking that in a moment. And Scotland, glad or sad to see this lady stepping down off the political stage? Let's get an update now on the other news headlines with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Here's your top stories from the GB Newsroom at 12:33. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon unexpectedly announced her decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for the leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, and Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes. Labour will recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. The Shadow Home Secretary unveiled plans for a neighbourhood policing guarantee, assigning officers and PCSOs to every community. The Home Office claim their proposed investment is a tenth of what the government is currently delivering. But Yvette Cooper criticised the Conservatives for their hands-off approach to policing, claiming not enough is being done.
So I want to talk today about what's been a complete collapse in Home Office leadership on crime and policing under the Conservatives, how they've stood back while neighbourhood policing has crumbled, while the charge rate has plummeted, while confidence in policing and the criminal justice system have fallen, while more victims are being let down and more criminals are getting off.
A new method of screening ambulance calls is to be introduced in England in an effort to reduce waiting times. Ambulance crews will now review Category 2 calls, which are not immediately life-threatening, conditions ranging from heart attacks and strokes to burns and severe headaches. Around 40% of these patients will receive a call back from a doctor, nurse or paramedic to see if there's an alternative to sending an ambulance. And as you've been hearing, British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion. That's more than triple what it made the year before. It's after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has urged the government to implement what he called a proper windfall tax. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
Bethany, thanks very much indeed. And indeed, we've just been discussing, of course, with Liam, those record profits at Centrica, owners of British Gas, £2.8 billion. Let's get the view now of Simon Francis, who joins us, campaigner at the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. Simon, thanks very much indeed for your time. We should perhaps just point out to people that British Gas itself, the retail operation, if you like, actually had profits down some 39%. So is it fair to actually say they should be paying more tax?
It's absolutely fair to be saying that, because the reasons, whilst those numbers are slightly down, the reasons why people's bills are so high are because of the huge profits that energy firms, not just Centrica, but other ones as well, are making on the production and supply of energy. And also what the British Gas numbers show is that they made significant profits from the trading arm. So that's every unit of energy that, from between it being produced in the North Sea or a wind farm to getting into your home, goes through a series of different trades. One of those trading firms is controlled by Centrica, and they've been making significant amounts of money as well. So there's huge amounts of money swirling around in the system for shareholders and for dividends and buybacks, but there's nothing seemingly for people who have been struggling in cold, damp homes this winter.
Yeah, well, Centrica do say, they're paying $1 billion in tax, even though, as you say, there's obviously an additional, I think, $300 million in their share buyback.
Yeah, and I think, the share buyback is, 3 times what they've said they're giving to people who are in vulnerable circumstances this year. So I think really there's very little excuse. The other thing about the profits on the British gas side of things is you have to sort of also ask, why is it that those numbers have fallen? So in the Ofgem regulations, energy firms are allowed to make a certain percentage of profit. So if those firms' numbers are falling anyway, it's because they are basically having to invest more in meeting their licence conditions, which are the bare minimum that they should be meeting in order to provide us with our energy supply, which is a basic human need. Everyone needs to stay warm. Everyone needs to access electricity.
Yeah, and Liam here in the studio reflecting that actually part of that figure may be because people are physically, literally using less gas and electricity, and therefore that profit figure is actually going down.
Absolutely, because people are just so worried about the high energy costs that we're hearing. The one thing that we were struck by in the Centrica announcement today was the fact that they have called for an urgent review of the energy market, which is something that ourselves and other campaigners at the Warmest Winter campaign have been calling for a long time, because clearly they've now also recognised that the energy market is broken. It is not serving customers. It is not helping the most vulnerable, and it needs long-term reform. And I think that's why they finally come to the conclusion as well that it does need a review.
Right. And how does that take place? Because, I mean, part of the problem is obviously we've had Shell, we've had BP, now Centrica, and they do point out, look, that the profits have come from the price set on the international markets. And that's very difficult to actually interfere with because it's obviously a structure that spans the globe.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what we need to see here is obviously stronger regulation of the energy firms by Ofgem, so we don't have any of these bad practices that we've obviously had reported in recent months. But also what we could start looking at is
the prepayment meters you're referring to, yeah?
Yeah, the prepayment meters, which again, slightly disappointed that British Gas is they say, well, we're extremely disappointed. Doesn't even begin to start to compensate for the pain that they've caused. But anyway, we can perhaps go on to that. What I think, we need to see are things like consideration of social tariffs, for example. So that's where people who are in vulnerable circumstances pay slightly less. Or an idea of an energy for all allowance, where everyone gets a basic amount of energy that they need to heat their home. If you want to run hot tubs, if you want to kind of sit there with all the windows open and the heating on, we wouldn't recommend that. But if you do that, then you should be paying more for your energy. So there's lots of different ways that the energy market within the UK could be reformed within the existing sort of international system.
Right. Simon, as ever, thank you for joining us from the Enfield Poverty Coalition with your reaction. Thanks very much indeed. And, of course, don't forget to let us know your thoughts on those figures, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, on February the 6th, 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck southern Turkey, northwest Syria, and so far it's left 41,000 people dead, even more being recovered, bodies across both countries. 17 million in total affected, with many survivors now injured and homeless. Well, in Britain, the donations have been pouring in, especially where large Turkish populations are based, in North London particularly. Ellie Costello has more details for us.
North London has the largest Turkish population in the UK. The community here has come together to send aid to people most devastated by the earthquake. ABS Transport is a logistics company that specialises in transporting goods between the UK and Turkey.
It was 3 in the morning when we got a call from one of our truck drivers who said, look, there's been a serious earthquake in the region. From 3 a.m. to 6 a.m, I remember it so clearly because we just sat there, complete silence, just in our heads thinking, what are we going to do? Our company's slogan is, let's lighten your load. So I just turned around and I said, let's lighten Turkey's load. And the whole thing has just unravelled itself, really.
Jeren was overwhelmed with donations, enough to help thousands of people. Many of the parcels were packed with care by local people.
This is one of those boxes that we've not touched. So they've put in crisps, marshmallows, there's pads in here, there's soups. Everything has been bought new. And a baby toy that might be useful. And I think what touched us the most was sending hugs on the card. And they've basically said, stay strong, love Zach.
Acı günümüzde
Jeren's husband Abdullah is driving a convoy of 7 lorries from London to the heart of the disaster zone. The journey will take 4 days and will arrive today. Some of the team are already there, distributing supplies to those in need.
None of us were ever prepared for what we received. In those 24 hours, we only had 4 hours sleep. I'm not from the region, but my husband is. But I did say that I didn't think no one would be affected. I don't think there would be an untouched person. And on Thursday, my cousin, who's the Consulate General in Iskenderun, who liaises between Syria and Turkey, has passed away.
Everyone working at ABS is Turkish, and Jeren says the news is affecting them all.
What's different with our office is that we were getting live updates from our own teams that are working out in Gaziantep, saying we're washing dead. I'd say the word describing it as trauma or traumatized would be a good description as to how we are.
Construction experts believe the collapse of thousands of buildings in Turkey was preventable. Turkish officials have said that arrest warrants for more than 100 people have been issued for failing to follow building codes. Those arrested so far include building contractors.
I am very angry. I am very sad things because the government is nothing to do with the government. The councils there, they shouldn't allow the people to build the houses without the regulation.
For the team here, the focus is on aid parcels. It will be days before normal work here resumes. But for the millions of Turks and Syrians who survived the earthquake, it will be several months, perhaps years, before they can rebuild from the worst disaster in the region's modern history. Ellie Costello, GB News.
And of course, we'll be keeping you updated on the various relief efforts and help being sent to both Turkey and Syria. Now, coming up, we'll have more on Labour's plan to fight crime, starting with their approach to knife crime. And all the details coming up for you. Stay with us.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Now, let's update you on Labour's plans to fight crime. Speaking at the Institute for Government earlier, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, saying that Labour will recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers, PCSOs, to tackle knife crime and drug dealing. At the event, she also paid tribute to Sir Keir Starmer for making clear what standards needed to be met in order to stand as a Labour candidate. Of course, that's referring to Jeremy Corbyn and his position to stand as a Labour candidate for North Islington. Well, let's get more now with our political reporter Olivia Utley, who's been at the event. And crime, of course, has always been one of those touchstone issues for the Tory party. And Labour starting to put together something criticising, of course, the disappearance of the Bobby on the beat, as we used to call them.
Yes, and it was very interesting to hear the tone that Yvette Cooper struck today. It was unashamedly Blairite, something that we've seen from a lot of previous shadow cabinet ministers in recent weeks. She used 3 times, I think, the phrase "tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime," which is of course a very famous phrase from the Blair days. As for the crux of the plan, she talked a lot about updating IT systems, which sounds a bit technocratic, but she argues that part of the problem is that you've got police officers overwhelmed by needless bureaucracy created by the systems that they're using are so old. The other big thing that she announced that she would do is introduce those 13,000 new bobbies on the beat, another quite a Blairite idea, quite sort of centrist idea. And she claimed that those would be funded by, essentially, it sounds again a bit technocratic, but stopping the practice of multiple forces doubling up on the same work streams, so making efficiencies in procurement systems. Now, there are a lot of questions, as we've heard with other shadow ministers, on whether those efficiencies could actually create the amount of savings needed to fund not just the salaries but also the training of 13,000 new police officers. But Yvette Cooper was very clear that in her mind any do add up. But yes, this was an extremely sort of centrist plan that it's clear that Labour again is trying to steal the Tories' clothes and take that issue of crime out of the blue and into the red.
And we remember that famous Blairite mantra, of course, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. And clearly that's being put back into action. Olivia, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. But let's stay with the issue of crime, with the rise of the so-called county line drug gangs, a factor in the increase in violence in rural areas. Criminals being pushed out of urban cities and towns. Well, the chairman of West Midlands Police Federation calling for a new approach to tackle violent crime and to gather intelligence too. Let's cross to Birmingham and speak to West Midlands reporter Jack Carson. Jack, clearly there's a recognition of the issue and how it's actually spilling out, if you like, from the cities to more rural areas.
That's exactly right. In the last year, there's been about an 11% increase in knife crime, and over the last 10 years, a 50% increase. Here in the West Midlands, it's above pre-pandemic levels, with a 32% increase in the last year. So you can see how much of a serious problem this is. How much both politicians, as we're hearing from Yvette Cooper today, trying to get a hold of it from a position of if Labour were in government. Of course, the Conservatives committing themselves in their manifesto back in 2019 to 20,000 extra police officers on the streets. They say they're meant to be reaching that target by April this year. But the West Midlands Police Federation and their chair, Richard Cook, I spoke to him because he believes that there needs to be a new approach on how to solve tougher crime.
We've been calling for a long time for a return to policing which is embedded in local communities, which then gives us the intelligence we need to react and respond spontaneously, as opposed to waiting until events happen. And that's talking about things like Section 60, use of Section 60, which can be controversial with some, but I think we should be using it far more before the event. You know, Parliament gave us these powers and we're simply not using them to the degree that we should be. I think this needs to be about really tough enforcement.
So you heard there from Richard Cook, who's the chair of the West Midlands Police Federation, that idea that there needs to be more police on the streets in order to get a trust within the community and therefore intelligence, because knife crime is a serious issue. 282 knife crime murders in the 12 months to March 2022. That's the worst levels since 1946. So it's a real problem that police and politicians are trying to grapple with.
Jack, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in the Midlands. And, of course, we'll see what emerges in terms of those efforts to gain more intelligence on the issues. But let's stay with policing matters, because the Met Police are now saying they will re-examine the death of a student, Ricky Reel, whose body was found in the Thames some 25 years ago. It follows decades of campaigning by his family. The student was only 20 years old when he went missing on a night out with friends back in October 1997. Well, the group was racially attacked by two white males. Let's speak now to a former Met officer, Norman Brennan, who joins us once more. Norman, thank you for joining us here on GB News. How difficult is the reopening of what you might call a cold case 25 years on to actually find out more about what occurred?
Well, just to clear up, I head Protect the Protectors, which is a voice on policing. That's the hat that I wear, not particular force. Look, I was a serving police officer at the time when Ricky Reel sadly and tragically died. In fact, Kingston is 2 miles from where I live at this present moment, and did then. I followed the case intently, and I was concerned. I represent homicide families. I give victims a voice, and also I try and reassure the public by advising them on law and what they can do when they're victims of crime. Every family that has somebody lost tragically through a crime or through an incident that occurs will want justice, and I can't argue with that, and they're right to want that. The original police investigation was such, and it was quite in depth, I know that, that they believed it was a tragic accident. There's CCTV in the area, they would have obtained witness statements, and they would have carried out extensive inquiries. However, when it went to the inquest, it was an open verdict, which means that the jury were not entirely convinced that it was in fact an accident. Now, here we are 25 years on. The families have gone through absolute hell, as I know from dealing with hundreds myself. And it's right that they try and get the justice they think they were denied at the time. And the Commissioner has rightly said, look, like a case cold review, I will get my officers to re-examine it. 25 years on, we may find something the original officers may have missed. And I think that's a right and sensible decision.
Yeah, I think that the Met Police statement saying they'll be looking at it with fresh eyes and exploring every possible avenue. But is one of the difficulties that, you know, with that passage of time, the original witnesses may have moved on or disappeared, and a lot of the direct evidence is no longer there?
That is one part, but the other part as well is that decades on after some crimes, it's amazing that a witness that for whatever reason, maybe they didn't like the police, maybe they thought what they saw wasn't relevant, that come forward and give that information. What I do want to reassure everybody about is that when there is a black victim, it's not the case, certainly in almost no case that I know, and I've represented and dealt with 1,000 families of homicide in 30 years, that a police officer will think that the individual or the victim is black. What I will tell you is this, is I meet investigating officers, senior investigating officers. I sit down and I drink with them, I socialise with them. And do you know what their passion is? Their passion is irrelevant of the sex, the colour, the creed of the victim. They want to arrest, if it's a crime, anyone that is responsible. And I know that these officers that are now looking and re-looking at Ricky Reel's case will do exactly that.
Norman, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, we'll see what that Met Police investigation brings up. But thank you for the moment. Coming up now for you, let's get an update on what the weather's doing for you.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Lots of cloud around today. The winds are going to be the big feature of the weather tonight and particularly tomorrow morning. Across parts of the north, we have Met Office yellow warnings in place. That's because of this area of low pressure deepening, intensifying as it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at the squeeze in the isobars. Those winds really picking up, especially through Friday morning. More on that in a moment. Let's get through the rest of today. As I said, a lot of cloud out there. Some drizzly conditions over parts of eastern England, clearing away, the odd spot of drizzle elsewhere, but also something a bit brighter developing. Parts of East Wales, North East England may well see some sunny spells before more rain pushes back into Northern Ireland. It's pretty mild out there today, double digits almost across the board, and with a bit of brightness we could get into the teens. During this evening, that rain is going to spread from Northern Ireland into western Scotland, where it will last all night. The rain getting heavier and heavier through the night as that low pressure moves in. The winds also then steadily increasing, really picking up after midnight across the northwest. Further south, well, it'll get a bit breezy. It stays cloudy. Look at these overnight temperatures, very mild indeed. We won't feel mild tomorrow in the winds. Now, those winds really whipping up tomorrow morning across Scotland initially, but also down across parts of northern England. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, particularly for high-sided vehicles, but could all cause some flying debris, certainly some disruption to the transport networks. Planes, flights may be cancelled. So a very blustery day across the north with showers in the far north. Again, further south, many places just dry and cloudy, but it will be windier than today. And we could at times see a little bit of rain in the southwest. Another very mild day across the south. Further north, it will be a colder day, despite a bit more sunshine, but obviously feeling a lot colder with those winds. Now, those winds will be easing through the afternoon and into the evening. A bit more rain coming into the northwest as we go through Friday evening. More details on the weather warnings on the Met Office website. Goodbye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 1 o'clock and you're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this lunchtime. What now for Scotland? What now for the United Kingdom after Nicola Sturgeon's surprise resignation? The burning question, not just who's going to replace her, but what does the SNP do about Scottish independence? The party meets tonight to decide the way forward and who will take them there. Kate Forbes, Angus Robertson, John Swinney amongst the names in the frame. We'll have the latest from Edinburgh and London for you. The fallout as Lancashire police are criticised for now divulging more personal information about missing mum Nicola Bulley and her issues with alcohol and the menopause. But why did they initially refuse to confirm that she was high risk? How has it damaged the investigation? And Labour focusing on crime this week, promising 13,000 new community police officers. The party might be soaring high in the polls, but can they persuade the public that they are tougher on crime than the Tories? And let us know what your view is on all the issues of the day. gbviews at gbnews.uk, especially, of course, if you're north of the border. Do you think that the politics there is now heading south? Let's get the latest headlines this hour with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for the leadership race to find a replacement for Nicola Sturgeon. She unexpectedly announced her resignation as First Minister of Scotland yesterday after 8 years in the job. Our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire joins us from Dumfries. Tony, how have people reacted there?
I think certainly people here are in shock, much like the rest of the company. This is obviously a bit of a Conservative heartland down here, and yet a lot of people think that Nicola Sturgeon just ran out her time. One of the comments that I've heard a couple of times this morning has been that had she not pursued independence so ferociously over the last several years, that perhaps she might still have a job to govern the country. On the other side of that, we're hearing some people down here. I think I found one of the few independent supporters down here who thinks that it's only a matter of time. But certainly, like much of the rest of the country, the people of Dumfries are very much divided on the issue right now.
That's very interesting. Our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, thank you for that update. The government has announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment. The new funding will be given to 151 councils in England to recruit more staff, improve recovery support for prison leavers and invest in addiction treatment. Ministers say the plans could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths every year. Labour will recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. The Shadow Home Secretary unveiled plans for a neighbourhood policing guarantee, assigning officers and PCSOs to every community. The Home Office claimed their proposed investment is a tenth of what the government is currently delivering, but Yvette Cooper criticised the Conservatives for their hands-off approach to policing, claiming not enough is being done.
So I want to talk today about what's been a complete collapse in Home Office leadership on crime and policing under the Conservatives, how they've stood back while neighbourhood policing has crumbled, while the charge rate has plummeted, while confidence in policing and the criminal justice system have fallen, while more victims are being let down and more criminals are getting off.
The number of people who've died following major earthquakes that struck southern Turkey and northern Syria has surpassed 42,000. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Authority says more than 4,300 aftershocks have hit the country since the initial quake. It's been 10 days since the disaster first struck, and rescue efforts are continuing. Yesterday, a 13-year-old boy was pulled from the rubble alive after being trapped for 228 hours. British gas owner Centrica has posted profits of £3.3 billion, more than triple what it made the year before. It comes after Ofgem launched an urgent inquiry to investigate the company for installing prepayment meters by force in vulnerable customers' homes. Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has urged the government to implement what he called a proper windfall tax. Meanwhile, 1 in 3 small businesses might not be able to cover their energy bills from April when the price guarantee rises. It's expected to increase by 20%, and at the same time, government will phase down its support for firms. New research by Experian has found around 30% of the 1.2 million small businesses it analysed will be at heightened risk of collapse. MPs and campaign groups have criticised Lancashire Police for revealing personal details about missing mother of 2, Nicola Bulley, who disappeared almost 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, detectives said the 45-year-old was vulnerable and that she had issues with alcohol linked with struggles and with the menopause. Tory MP Alicia Kearns said it made her deeply uncomfortable, and Big Brother Watch called it a serious invasion of privacy. But Peter Faulding, who's been involved in the search, says the police aren't to blame.
I still feel so sorry for them that it's been released this way. It should never have come out. They could have just told us on the quiet. Press wouldn't have known. No, we would just been changed everything. I feel so, like I said, the police are getting beaten up here. This is terrible because it's not the police. It's just the comms piece where whoever's made these decisions needs to answer lots of questions. Let's not knock the police. Let's not knock the family. Let's regroup. get together and then redo this search again so we actually try and get some closure for this poor family.
You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed for that. So, politicians across the United Kingdom assessing that new political reality after Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and that shock resignation yesterday in Edinburgh. She's received tributes from across the political spectrum, Prime Minister and Sir Keir Starmer for the opposition, praising her public service for the people of Scotland. But the race to replace her as leader and First Minister already underway. The National Executive Committee will meet tonight to decide the timetable for that leadership election. Candidates expected to include Angus Robertson. He seems to be top of the list. Also Deputy First Minister John Swinney, who led the party between 2000 and 2004, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes and Health Secretary Humza Yousaf. But the bigger question too about what the party does now about Scottish independence. Let's hear more from Darren McCaffrey, our political editor in Edinburgh.
Well, after the shock decision by Nicola Sturgeon to resign yesterday, attention, as it always does in politics, now moves to the future about who is going to take over the leadership next, and indeed what the SNP do about that big constitutional question of trying to get a second referendum on independence. We know, in part, some of those questions will be answered a little later on today, we think, when the National Executive meet to decide on the timetable for the new election. There had been an expectation the SNP were going to hold a massive conference next month on whether they were going to potentially use the Westminster election next year as a de facto second referendum. There are many in the SNP who think that's a bad strategy, and many now calling on that meeting next month to be postponed, so there is enough time to get a new leader elected. In terms of who's going to take over, well, there are lots and lots of names floating around, lots of suggestions, lots of rumours. Kate Forbes, for example, who's the current Treasury Secretary, well, she's been mooted as a rising star. She is socially conservative. She is someone who is pretty young. She's in her early 30s, but is seen as potential leadership material. The question is her time now? Then you've got Angus Robertson. You may remember him. He was the SNP leader at Westminster for a period of time. Again, someone who seemed to have quite a lot of experience in going in his favour, but has had problems in the past. And then you've got someone like John Swinney, who's the current Deputy First Minister, been involved in Scottish politics for decades, was the SNP leader at one stage around 2 decades ago, but ultimately has never held the top job as First Minister, and many people feel, is he up to it or not? Again, it will be up to SNP members to decide who does take over. And then you've got this big question about what they do when it comes to that second referendum question. We know one of the reasons Nicola Sturgeon decided to leave the stage yesterday, if you like, is because the SNP are slightly boxed in on a strategy on the way forward. We know the UK Supreme Court have slapped them down. We know that the UK Parliament is not willing to grant a second referendum. So what strategy, what ploy do the SNP use next? Alex Salmond has suggested this morning that this should be used as a reset for Scottish nationalism to try and work out what the plan should be going forward. And all this also with a whole range of different problems in the in-tray of an incoming First Minister, not least a struggling healthcare system, educational attainment levels that aren't terribly good in Scotland. Big questions about that Gender Recognition Act and what they do in dealing with the UK government, and of course a cost of living crisis that is affecting the rest of the UK. One person, though, who is pleased to see the back of Nicola Sturgeon is Donald Trump. He, the former US president, remember him, he said that it is wonderful that the people of Scotland are much better off after her resignation. Good riddance, he says, to the failed woke extremist Nicola Sturgeon of Scotland. So fair to say that while most politicians in Britain, despite the political differences, have said that they will miss Nicola Sturgeon, Donald Trump is not one of them.
Darren updating us from Holyrood. More coming up from Edinburgh as the politicians there and, of course, down in London assess the way forward. But let's break away now to update you on the latest in the Nicola Bulley story. Of course, after police were accused of not divulging enough information about the missing mother of two, they've now been accused of doing the opposite after revealing she'd previously been suffering with significant issues of alcohol and those had resurfaced with her struggles with the menopause. Lancashire Police also disclosing they'd previously visited her home in concern for her welfare just under 3 weeks before she disappeared. Well, it's 3 weeks tomorrow since she went missing at St Michael's on Wyre after dropping her children off at school and then going on that dog walk. Let's get more now. Donna Jones, who's Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire. Donna, thanks for joining us once more. I see that Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, has commented on Lancashire's approach as being very unusual. Do you share that assessment?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very easy to criticise, isn't it, when we are bystanders looking in. But I have to say there are a number of ways that the case appears to have been handled that maybe not our textbook. They are not the way that you would normally handle such an unusual case as this. Very often when police are dealing with missing people, what we call MISPers, the police do put out a public statement and they do often make it incredibly clear if that person is vulnerable. So it could be an elderly person that's gone missing, for example, with dementia, or perhaps a high-risk missing teenager. It could be a young girl who is at risk of, sexual exploitation, and they will make that vulnerability incredibly clear. What's drawn so much attention to this is the fact that she's just appeared to vanish into thin air. But actually, the point that she, as it's now come out from that press conference yesterday, has a number of vulnerabilities, could lead to, and I'm sure it is leading to, further police lines of investigation around whether or not she has consciously gone off somewhere of her own accord.
Of course, the Assistant Chief Constable did reflect on the amount of speculation that had been going on, not just online, but in the mainstream media as well, and that had been sort of complicating the investigation. But I guess that the problem is that the police want to use the public's eyes and ears in these cases. The difficulty is, what do you tell them? What do you actually keep back for quite reasonable grounds for the family and indeed for friends as well?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, and one of the VTs you played 5 or so minutes ago talked about the fact that it is very normal for the police to put out, as I say, vulnerabilities. Now, if this had been put out at the get-go and her vulnerabilities had been shared, many people may have thought, well, either she's gone off and left of her own accord, or perhaps she has made a decision to take her own life. I think the speculation that's been coming from, amateur sleuths sat at their armchairs at home is because of the very unusual nature of somebody simply appearing to disappear into thin air. And secondly, because they weren't aware of those vulnerabilities. So one of the things that people were saying is this is a woman who's got a job, she's with a partner, she's got 2 children. She seems to have almost the perfect life. What's happened? And then when you were looking at the water and we had the expert divers that turned up and said, this is not fast running water, the water's not particularly deep, she's of, otherwise good health in terms of fit and healthy, she can swim. So of course the hypothesis of her drowning was becoming less believable. And I think that's why people have been sitting at home speculating about what's been going on, because there was only part of the picture out there. Now, in some circumstances, of course, it's entirely appropriate for the police not to put all of the information out there. But I certainly think hindsight with Nicola Bulley, it has proven that those vulnerabilities are absolutely probably key from what we're seeing. And there probably would have been far less speculation about what had happened to her if those vulnerabilities had been known from the get-go.
Yeah, so given that, do you think other police forces, perhaps including you there in Hampshire, will be reassessing how you deal with these issues, even though, of course, each investigation is particular in its circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't want to in any way criticise Lancashire Police. They have got the biggest, highest profile case going on at the moment. There are people looking not just in Britain, but around the world with what's gone on with Nicola Bulley. With all cases, whether it be a murder, a rape, the disappearance of somebody like this, there are always learning points for every police force, because you can never preempt every nuance in a murder investigation, for example. But there are some really clear things here, and obviously media management and making sure you're communicating with a very concerned local community and now, national community across Britain is absolutely key. And, it's not for me to speculate in any way as a Police and Crime Commissioner, but I certainly think the information that Lancashire Police put out yesterday around those vulnerabilities are absolutely crucial. And, as someone else said a few moments ago, my heart and my prayers are with her family and her friends. It must be heartbreaking for them. And, of course, we all need, including her family, her children and her parents, need those answers very, very quickly.
Indeed, we share those short thoughts indeed. But thank you very much, Donna, for updating us with your assessment there. Donna Jones, Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire. Now, let's return to the small question of the future of the United Kingdom. Yes, the fallout from yesterday's political shockwave, that resignation of Nicola Sturgeon. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood at Westminster. And there's a particular reason, of course, to speak to you at Westminster, Tom, because we've got Stephen Flynn, the SNP's leader in Westminster, reflecting that what they need to do with this party gathering in a month's time or so is really work out what they do and where they go on the issue of independence itself.
Yes, certainly, and it does seem that this strategy of Nicola Sturgeon to turn the next election into somehow a second referendum by proxy has caused a bit of rancour and a bit of discontent within the SNP. And it's interesting listening there to Stephen Flynn and his comments today. They really do reflect what are growing fissures within the SNP. It was only a few weeks ago that there was an effective coup here in Westminster, and the former leader of the SNP group in Parliament here, Ian Blackford, was turfed out, and Stephen Flynn won a not particularly competitive election to replace him. And that's particularly interesting because Stephen Flynn is someone from a different wing of the SNP from Nicola Sturgeon. He represents a seat up near Aberdeen. He's been more in favour, for example, of the oil and gas industry than Nicola Sturgeon has been at Holyrood with her Green Party partners there in government. And so it is fascinating to see how the SNP, when it first arrived in huge numbers in Westminster back in 2015, when over 40 Scottish seats for the first time in history went to the nationalists, they acted as a sort of uniform bloc. They were very, very disciplined in their messaging and in their whipping. They wouldn't allow any sort of fissures or disagreements to be public, to be known. Well, in the last year or so, that sort of discipline has really broken down, whether it's on environmental issues, whether it's on gender issues, or indeed whether it's on the issue of how to achieve independence. More and more fissures have appeared, and it does seem that Nicola Sturgeon was struggling ever more to try and unite what was becoming a more and more disunited party.
Yeah, and another SNP MP there, Joanna Cherry, calling for reform and healing. So an indication perhaps that, you know, the party does have a lot to do to come together, or is it going to be more disparate in terms of the approach taken?
Well, leadership elections are never pretty. We've seen how the Tories fared during their leadership contest over last summer. That did do no favours for the Conservatives in the polls and clearly caused quite a lot of turbulence. Many of the people of the United Kingdom criticised the Conservative Party for talking to itself rather than the country over that summer. Similarly, when the Labour Party had its last really fractious leadership election back in the summer of 2015, it ended with Jeremy Corbyn winning, someone who was not aligned with where the median voter is in the country, but instead someone who chased after extreme members of that party. And in a similar way, the risk for the SNP is that the candidates in this upcoming election will chase after an extreme small selectorate of SNP members rather than talking to the median voter in Scotland as a whole. The question is, how do the other parties potentially take advantage of that, given the SNP's overwhelming dominant position in terms of seats and vote share as things stand?
Tom, that's a very good question. So thank you for that, because we are now going to speak to Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament, Jamie Green, who joins us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. And let's pose that question that Tom was putting to us there in Westminster. How do you actually not profit from this, but actually take the issue forward? Because clearly Labour think they've got 10 to 15 seats they could gain as a result of all this.
Yeah, good afternoon. Look, it's a massive change in Scottish politics. I think no one can doubt that. It's such an unexpected shift in the landscape here. We're so used to seeing Nicola Sturgeon in the Parliament and on our television screens at one point on a daily basis. I think perhaps a bit too much. But, I think her gone from leadership position and at the front role of the independence movement, I think, will really reshape the landscape here. Now, every political party will have to deal with it in their own way. I think, what I'm more interested in is not how opposition parties capitalise on it, but actually what we're calling for is that the next First Minister, and by default the next leader of the SNP, has to get back to the day job and focus on the issues that really matter to the electorate of Scotland. There's a lot of things to get through. Nicola Sturgeon has left a legacy, whether we like it or not, that needs to be dealt with. And I really want the next First Minister to be focusing on those issues and making sure that both of Scotland's governments actually are constructively working together. I'm not entirely convinced that was ever Nicola Sturgeon's strategy.
Well, we've got Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader at Westminster, urging this party conference to be postponed so they can actually discuss the way forward. I mean, do you think actually indicates that perhaps the whole question of pushing for independence is now being reassessed? And as you say, the other problems that may hit them at the ballot box, and that is the health service, drug use, transport problems, the ferries and so on, that's going to come to the forefront?
Absolutely, and I would rather their next conference is all about that, is all about those issues. The health service, where the SNP government in Scotland hasn't met their cancer waiting times for a decade, where we're failing to build new ferries, they're massively over budget, where our education attainment gap is widening and not getting narrower. As the First Minister promised, by the way, she said, "Judge me on my record on education." So on that promise alone, she should have left office. I mean, I think the SNP need to step outside of the bubble of independence and start getting back to that day job. I do genuinely hope, perhaps a little bit optimistically, that the next First Minister and leader of the SNP will do that. So whoever it is, and there's quite a wide field of candidates, and I know some of them well from my days in Parliament. Yeah. I just want them to make sure that they are listening to people, that they are working constructively with opposition parties, because I don't think there's a monopoly on good ideas in politics. But whether or not that will happen remains to be seen.
OK, Jamie, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed. Jamie Green, Tory MSP, joining us with his view. Well, what about the journalists and what they're making of all this? Let's speak now to John Ferguson, who's political editor of the Sunday Mail, joining us from Glasgow. A bit of a rewrite going on in terms of political reporting at the moment. It did seem to catch everyone by surprise yesterday, John, including you.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, I think people knew this was coming at some point relatively soon, but it caught people by surprise that it happened now. Nobody was really expecting it. I think people expected that at some point over the next year and a half, Nicola Sturgeon would decide to go. There had been rumours over the last couple of weeks, but, there had been similar rumours for many months before. So, yeah, people were surprised, though in the long term it wasn't an unexpected development, but it really does change the landscape in Scotland. As Jamie was saying earlier, the SNP are facing significant challenges. They've been in power for a long time. We've got perceived failings in education and health, and the lack of movement on the independence question. There's very specific examples of failings on ferries that haven't been delivered, hospital scandals. The one thing that the party has benefited from is Nicola Sturgeon's personal popularity over the last couple of years, and so this really is a big change, and whoever comes in her place will have a mountain to climb.
Is that meaning that politics is going to get a bit more boring for you and all the other scribblers, as they're unkindly called, in that perhaps we haven't got the divisive nature of her leadership anymore?
Well, I don't think that the divisiveness will go away. I think that the SNP have said that the members will choose the next leader. Those members are going to want someone that's got a clear plan for how they're going to achieve independence. Nicola Sturgeon's plan was to go for this de facto referendum in the next Westminster election. The problem that whoever comes in will have is that there's very limited options in how you pursue Scotland becoming an independent country now, but one option would be to, for example, trigger a Holyrood election and use that as a de facto referendum. The other option is to kind of try to build consensus and to get the polls for independence up to a level that will force the UK government to give the Section 30 order that would allow a normal referendum. So I don't think that the question of independence will go away, and I think that things will remain quite interesting next year.
I was going to say, you still need the stories to fill your paper, of course, so let's hope that carries on. But John, for the moment, thanks for updating us there with your assessment in Glasgow. Now, coming up, all our households struggling with energy bills, of course, now what's been reignited, a call for energy firms to pay more tax because Centrica has got these profits of 2.8 billion. Taking a look at that in a moment. Let's update you on the weather to see if you... Oh, actually, we know weather, so you can turn the heating back down. More in a moment. Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on the latest bumper profits with energy firms. It's British gas owner Centrica this time reporting underlying annual profits of £2.8 billion, up from just £392 million in 2021. Well, of course, with thousands of our households struggling with rising gas and electric bills, it's sparked, if you pardon the expression, renewed calls for energy firms to be paying more windfall tax. Let's get more with our economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. And Liam, of course, we're talking about Centrica as the parent company, everyone looking at British gas as their energy supplier. There are 2 different sets of figures, but overall it's indicating just how much these companies are making on the international wholesale market.
In the whole energy complex, Mark, there are what we call upstream companies. They're the companies that dig the oil and gas out the ground, if you like. Then there are the downstream companies, the petrol retailers, the utility bill companies that seem to take so much money out of our bank accounts each month at the moment for those of us who are on a direct debit. And there's been some misreporting of these numbers, so we've taken the trouble, as we did in the last hour, to put them up in a graphic, and I'll go through them carefully for radio listeners too. So the Centrica, that's the parent company of British Gas, their operating profits, including all the gas and so on that they've dug out of the North Sea, were 948 million in 2021. This year, up massively, 3,300 million. There it is, 3.3 billion. That's because the amount of money they've been getting for their gas, in particular on wholesale markets, has skyrocketed, not least due to the war in Ukraine. Then you've got the underlying profits. These are the figures that exclude a one-off sale that Centrica made of a series of companies called Spirit Energy. And they're still pretty eye-watering numbers, the ones you cited. 392 million in 2021, up to 2.8 billion, 2,800 million in 2022. And that's the most commonly cited figure. What isn't commonly cited is the figure for British Gas itself. And British Gas is the company that sells you the gas that comes out your cooker and out of your fire.
Or even the electric, as they now provide as well.
Absolutely. They are the customer-facing energy provider. And you see there, Mark, I'll read out the numbers for radio listeners. In 2021, the profits were 118 million. In 2022, they were just 72 million, just. It's still a pretty chunky number. Now, one reason those profits have gone down is because people are just using less gas. Companies are using less gas. Factories have been on go slow, as we've been reporting. And also, the energy providers who take money out of our bank accounts with the direct debit, they, of course, have to pay more for the wholesale gas. So British Gas itself, their profits have actually fallen this year.
Yeah, 39% down. So therefore, when Rachel Reeves and others calls for increased windfall tax, is that actually going to work? Because obviously a lot of the profits are made outside the UK, and bearing in mind the fact they say they've given 75 million back to customers, they're paying $1 billion overall, Centrica. In, you know, does this actually work?
Let's be completely clear. So the windfall tax, I mean, look, for years we've had a supplementary tax on companies operating in the North Sea. Instead of paying corporation tax that's currently 19%, going up to 25% in April on their profits, they pay 40% corporation tax. Since the windfall tax came in early last year in response to the war in Ukraine, those oil and gas companies operating in the North Sea have paid 60% of corporation tax. So that's on Centrica. It's not on British Gas. And Rachel Reeves, I've looked through what she said, and she's got very close to being wrong, but she's kept the right side. She's been well advised of being correct here. But look, I would say in the March budget, there has to be more action taken to get money off these North Sea oil companies. It's politically just too irresistible for the politicians to not go after these companies, because in April, Mark, we're due to see the energy price cap on household bills go up from $2,500 to $3,000 a year, even though wholesale prices are coming down. It's going to be very hard to explain that politically.
Yeah, and especially that direct debit when it comes through that letterbox once more. Liam, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. More reaction on that. More reaction on the sport, Arsenal, Man City, and who could be buying Man United. All that coming up in a moment. Let's get an update, though, with Bethany on the headlines.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. Here's your top stories from the GB Newsroom at 1:34. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon announced her unexpected decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for a leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, and Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes. Labour will recruit an extra 13,000 community police officers to tackle antisocial behaviour and violent crime if they win the next election. The Shadow Home Secretary unveiled plans for a neighbourhood policing guarantee, assigning officers and PCSOs to every community. The Home Office claim their proposed investment is a tenth of what the government is currently delivering, but Yvette Cooper criticised the Conservatives for their hands-off approach, claiming not enough is being done.
So I want to talk today about what's been a complete collapse in Home Office leadership on crime and policing under the Conservatives, how they've stood back while neighbourhood policing has crumbled, while the charge rate has plummeted, while confidence in policing and the criminal justice system have fallen, while more victims are being let down and more criminals are getting off.
The number of people who've died following major earthquakes that struck southern Turkey and northern Syria has surpassed 42,000. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Authority says more than 4,300 aftershocks have hit the country since the initial quakes. 11 days on, and in some places, the focus is moving away from rescue efforts and towards clearing the rubble and rebuilding. And MPs and campaign groups have criticised Lancashire Police for revealing personal information about missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley. Yesterday, detectives said Miss Bulley was vulnerable and that she had issues with alcohol and the menopause. Tory MP Alicia Kearns said it made her deeply uncomfortable, and Big Brother Watch called it a serious invasion of privacy. The 45-year-old disappeared almost 3 weeks ago. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Mark will be back with you in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now we're updating you in the news headlines about Labour's plans to tackle knife crime. Well, latest data suggests that that knife crime in the home county is 10 times higher than it was a decade ago. The huge increase in rural areas being blamed on the so-called county lines drug networks transporting illegal drugs, mostly crack cocaine and heroin, from cities out into the counties. Well, as organised crime groups noticed unmet demand outside the urban areas, more started to emerge around 2015 to 2017. Let's get more now with our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who's in Birmingham, because it seems, Jack, that the police now are wanting to gather more intelligence on how to start breaking this stranglehold, some would say, that they've got on the rural areas.
That's exactly right. Around 11% is an increase in the last year on knife crime in England and Wales, up 50% over the last 10 years. And of course, we heard today Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper setting out their ideas for how to get streets safer and how to make communities safer with this neighbourhood policing policy, the recruitment of 13,000 more community officers, 4,000 more PCSOs included within that, because they say that the Conservative government has had a laissez-faire approach to crime and policing, but the Conservatives saying that on the streets back in 2019. They're set to reach that target by April. But I've been speaking to the chair of the West Midlands Police Federation, Richard Cook, about how to solve tougher crime. He is saying that it needs to be more in the communities, because when you're in the communities, there's more trust and there's more intelligence. Take a listen.
We've been calling for a long time for a return to policing which is embedded in local communities, which then gives us the intelligence we need to react and respond spontaneously, as opposed to waiting until events happen. And that's talking about things like Section 60, use of Section 60. which can be controversial with some. But I think we should be using it far more before the event. You know, Parliament gave us these powers and we're simply not using them to the degree that we should be. I think this needs to be about really tough enforcement.
And just to talk about both issues, the intelligence and the enforcement are both going to take manpower. But of course, if you're talking about trying to gather intelligence, I guess that means undercover officers and, you know, a long-term operation.
Well, actually, one of the things that Richard Cook mentioned was having multi-skilled officers. So, kind of diverging from the idea that Labour were setting out today, officers that could do lots of different jobs, like you say, possibly undercover, visible within the community, but also available to kind of respond to any other incidents. So you're kind of covering a lot more areas, but officers which are trusted and based within their communities. That's how he believes you can get the intelligence, which will help stop prevention. One of the things he mentioned was, when it comes to neighbourhood policing, it has to be enforced, and it can't just be lots of people going around, what he said, patting the heads of people. It has to be actual substance and actually getting a grip of this problem. 282 knife crime murders were committed over the last year. That's the worst record since 1946. You can see how much of a problem this is.
Yeah, Jack, thank you for that. Sorry to interrupt. We're just going to break away from you there in Birmingham to head to 10 Downing Street. And hopefully we can bring you the pictures there of the Polish president just about to emerge. There he is speaking to reporters. Let's have a quick listen to what he's got to say. Well, he is actually speaking in Polish, which is not very helpful for me, but I can tell you that he has been meeting the Prime Minister. And indeed, Andrzej Duda has been talking in Brussels, of course, about NATO's involvement in acting faster, he said, in the event of any attack from Russia, because, of course, Poland worried about its eastern flank as such. Mr. Duda telling NATO, we want to be as self-sufficient as possible and take our security and what we offer our allies very seriously. However, we would like NATO to react faster to any potential attack. He said that at that joint conference with Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary-General. But this also coming after NATO jets in Poland intercepted 3 Russian military planes. Poland does have the American F-16 jets, which, of course, I think Ukraine would like to have aiding its aerial operations, particularly with this latest onslaught from Russia on Ukraine overnight. And, in fact, of course, Poland been supplying those Leopard 2 tanks, which it had from Germany to Ukraine. But we'll update you more on what's been discussed between the Polish president and the Prime Minister. But let's return now to that issue of knife crime, what Labour's been saying, and indeed, of course, what we've just been hearing from Jack about the so-called county lines and their involvement. Let's speak now to Stephen Roberts, former Director of Professional Standards at the Met Police. Stephen, thanks very much indeed for your time. It is quite a complex issue because clearly knives are being carried now, not just for self-defence, as some claim, but also as offensive weapons with these gangs. And therefore the question for police as to who do you put in place to actually tackle it? Is it intelligence or is it just arresting people and then finding if they're carrying a knife?
In the short term, enforcement and rigorous enforcement is really the only option. But it's not sufficient in itself to deal with this problem. You have to have a blend of policies and strategies in order to really address the root causes of knife crime. And part of that is not spending money on the police service, it's spending money on youth services, taking kids with not enough to do off the streets, giving them some sort of purposeful activity. So you've got that whole spectrum from essentially social action through intelligence work to identify the people involved in county lines, through to enforcement, both against the traders in illegal drugs, but also against the people who are selling and mixing into the local community, getting the trust of local communities so that you do pick up that easier sort of intelligence from people simply telling the police service what's going on in the areas that they live in. So no single easy answer.
Yeah, that's the issue, of course, that Jack was updating us on in Birmingham there. This call for the intelligence from, I guess, what we used to call the Bobby on the beat, just knowing what was going on in their patch.
Absolutely. People who are known and trusted faces within the community. Police officers who are part of the community, not police officers who only appear when there's a problem.
What about the bigger picture, though, and that is the employment as such of these gangs, of these youths to actually courier the drugs? I mean, is the approach there that really one needs to take out the organised criminals at the top?
One needs to take out everything from top to bottom in the pyramid of selling, up to and including the people who are importing those drugs into the country. So you have the National Crime Agency at that level dealing with other governments, with other police forces across the world to try and reduce the supply. But you also need to attack the importers, the middlemen, and the people who are actually selling, as well as the social activity to try and give the customers better things to do.
So what do you make then of what Labour have outlined in terms of the increase in the community support officers? I mean, would that money be going to the right area to tackle that?
Any sort of increase and uplift in police funding across the country is going to be welcome. If more community officers are recruited, if more police community support officers are recruited, that will free up manpower in order to put them into perhaps more covert tasks or as crime squads and detectives. So, yes, of course, it's a very good start, but it's a very expensive promise that the Shadow Home Secretary's made.
Indeed, and of course the money has to be delivered as well before the boots are on the ground, but we shall see what occurs. But Stephen Roberts, former Director of Professional Standards at the Met, thank you very much for your time here on GB News. Now, I think we can speak once to Julie Taylor as well, who's just coming on to join us as anti-knife crime campaigner. Julie, thanks very much for joining us. I don't know if you're hearing what Stephen was saying there in terms of what should be done, top to bottom, and indeed any help is welcome at the moment.
Yes, of course it is. Everyone's talking the talk, but nobody's walking the walk. They're all saying it, but nobody's doing it. You know, my grandson was killed by knife crime 3 years ago, and nothing's changing. We need more visible police. We need that local Bobby. We need the kids to trust the police, because at the moment, none of them do. I personally was brought up to sort of respect and fear the police, and I always did. Had no inclination with the police at all, nothing to do with them, because I never got into trouble. I never did anything wrong. I was always on the right side of the law, and I was very blessed that Essex Police did Liam's murder trial and did a very good job of it. We had 3 convictions. But other people aren't quite as lucky as we are, and there's just a lack of everything. Everything they both said is what I try and say and speak to everybody about anyway.
Do you think, though, that we have lost the battle in that they are now such a common currency as both what these kids would term defensive as well as offensive weapons?
Yes, because there's not enough deterrence out there, is there? So it starts at home with the parents watching their children. It starts with them checking their rooms, checking their bags, checking their friends. We need education in school. I personally go into schools, and I know other mums and grandmothers do, because we have our own legacies for our own children to keep them alive. It needs harsher sentences, because the sentences are absolutely ridiculous. I saw 2 middle-aged gentlemen this year got 31 years for a robbery with a hammer. You're getting less for life. We need proper sentences, not mollycoddling, all the snowflakes that want to say, human rights. Well, our deceased have no rights. We have to speak for the dead because they can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, so
the issue to change.
Right, so the issue of sentencing as well as the prevention then?
Yes, and there was a law, wasn't there, that, if you were caught with a knife, you went to prison for 4 years. Well, the prisons are too full, so build more prisons, because they're getting away with it. They just expect to go out, carry a knife for their own protection. I try and understand it from every aspect. I've spoken to so many kids, and I try and listen to what they're saying, but I can't understand it. So they're putting themselves in danger for even taking that knife out. If they haven't got that knife on them, they're not classed as that sort of child, are they? And if they've got a knife, they're more likely to use it in an altercation, because I think, well, they've got a knife, so I'm going to stab them before they stab me.
Indeed.
You know, so let's have more stop and search. They've got the powers, so use the powers. Everybody says, oh, we don't want stop and search. It's not right. It's not human rights. Those people have not lost someone to corrupt a knife crime. If they had, they'd feel the same as we do.
Julie, thank you very much indeed for your time on GB News once more. Thanks for joining us. Now, a bit of sport, and not a tale of two cities, but a tale of two teams in one city. The 4-goal thriller last night, Man City getting the upper hand in that 3-1 win over Arsenal, and they're top of the tree. And then, of course, Manchester United, what will happen with them? Reports of this potential Qatari takeover as the team prepare for the first leg of their showdown with Barcelona tonight. Who better than Aidan to actually take us through the story of two Manchesters? Man City, who, of course, obviously have been in the headlines over this issue of funding, and Pep Guardiola trying to sort of, I guess, G the team back out into action. It certainly worked last night with Arsenal.
Well, I think that's a case in point, actually. I mean, I was thinking about it on the way in. Yeah, it's a siege mentality. All the top managers have done that. We remember Sir Alex Ferguson doing it a lot. He basically turned the world. We turned his team against the world and vice versa, and it produced results out on the pitch. Now, last night was a little bit rope-a-dope, if we're going to call in a boxing phrase.
The Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, they went in there. They let Arsenal have the ball. 36% possession. I don't think a City team has had that lower amount of a territorial share for quite some years. So to win on that, and I believe also, I've said on here repeatedly, I don't believe the title race is over. I never thought it was over even a few weeks ago. Because we're in February, middle of February, getting towards the end of February, we think it's later in the season than it actually is. Don't forget we had a World Cup in the middle of that, which means we lost 7 fixtures. We're effectively now where we would be normally in January. So there's a long, long way to go. A lot of football to be played. You look at Arsenal, I think they're missing Gabriel Jesus up front. They're beginning to feel his loss, having been injured at the World Cup. Former City player, of course. And then last night we saw Eddie Nketiah. He had a couple of chances. Yes, he delivered against Man United a few weeks ago. Couldn't do it last night. They're the margins, Mark. They really are.
Yeah, and Saka, I think the photo says it all there, but I think, it is...
See, that's where the squad comes into it. We see that picture there. We see that picture of Jack Grealish scoring. He was replaced by Phil Foden just later on. That's the squad depth that you need to see yourself through a season. When you've got fixtures concertinaed either side, and it isn't spoken about enough. If you ask any sports scientist what the key determinant in player performance these days is, the amount of football they play.
Strength and depth as well.
Strength and depth is all important.
And talking of that, Manchester United, where are we with the Qataris, who've got a lot of cash to splash, as we saw in the World Cup?
Well, they have, yeah. I mean, look, James Radcliffe, this is after the Glazers made it clear last year that the club is up for sale. James Radcliffe has put his cards on the table. He's shown the colour of their money. UEFA have a problem here because they're going to have to ratify, they're going to have to at least read through the semantics around the Qatari bid. The issue here is that the state already owns effectively Paris Saint-Germain. They would be competing at the higher echelons of European football with Manchester United. Can you have the same people owning this two different clubs? I think it's difficult.
Especially given that the questions have been raised about Manchester City, the other club in the city, and how you actually organise your finances.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, Qatar, that's a problem for later on. I don't think we're going to see the extravagant spending that... Although saying that, with United, it's difficult because their income is so much higher. I mean, if we had...
Because of all the image rights and all the...
Everything you can think of is a cash cow. So Ed Woodward said recently, this former CEO said it would make money without even playing football. No, that's the issue. However, if we scale it back just slightly, the sponsorship deals at Man United, they're losing £2 million a week now. The sponsorship deals now on the front of the shirt are not worth as much as they were back in 2014. So they are losing money. They had a COVID... I mean, don't forget, they in the course of the season, match day revenue alone in the stadium is £111 million. Yeah. That went down to £7 million during the COVID era. So they've lost a lot there. They're not in the Champions League this season. They got knocked out in the first knockout phase last year.
Which
so there is a hole.
A lot of money.
There is a hole in the budget. They were paying Cristiano Ronaldo exorbitant fees until just recently. So they're going to have to deal with that, but it shouldn't be that difficult. It's in rude health financially. The turnover is high. The profit's not so good, but you can work on that once you're inside the building.
Thank you to our business correspondent. Thank you for that. We'll see what happens at the top of the league as well. Aidan, as ever, thank you very much indeed. Coming up in this next hour, more on what happens to the United Kingdom. Yes, the question of independence back in play. And we'll have the latest for you from Edinburgh and from London. Stay with us.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Storm Otto, named by the Danish Weather Service, could cause some problems across parts of northern Britain on Friday morning, particularly Scotland and northern England. Here comes that storm system. Notice the isobars squeezing together. It's the winds that are likely to cause the issue, particularly through the early hours of Friday morning, and then during the morning the strongest winds will work a little further south. Back to the rest of today, and rain from that system will be moving in across Scotland. It's going to be a very wet night in western Scotland, but the rain light and patchy over northern England and Northern Ireland. Further south, most places will just stay dry and cloudy. It will turn windy here, but the strongest winds will be further north, and it's going to be a very mild night in the south, with many places staying in double figures. Let's look at those winds though, first of all, because they increase through the early hours in western Scotland and then gets very gusty all morning across Scotland down into northern England. Gust of wind of 70, perhaps in some locations 75 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, certainly to the transport network. Planes flights may be delayed or cancelled, and there's likely to be some flying debris around, and certainly difficult driving conditions, especially for high-sided vehicles on some of the Transpennine routes. Plenty of sunny spells developing, but it will be blustery. Further south, quite cloudy, most places dry, a little bit of light rain in the southwest. But it will be a very mild day here, colder further north, especially with those winds, which will ease through the afternoon. Much lighter winds as we head into the weekend. Some more wet weather pushing in. That will bring some snow to parts of Scotland, chiefly over hills. Mostly rain at low levels, but could see some for a time as we head into Saturday. Then Saturday is a mixed picture, really. A bit of patchy rain on the south coast. There'll be some rain for a time over southern Scotland, northern England, Northern Ireland, but tending to fizzle out through the day. Some brighter spells elsewhere. Sunday sees more rain coming into parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mostly dry for England and Wales.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
It's 2 o'clock and you're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this hour. After Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, everyone caught by surprise. The question now, who will replace her, but also what does it mean for Scottish independence and the future of the UK? Already calls for the party to rethink its strategy and independence as they meet tonight. We'll have the latest from Edinburgh and from London coming up. And breaking news coming up on the search for missing mum Nicola Bulley. Lancashire police say they believe that the public focus has become distracted from finding Nikki. They said more about speculation and rumours into her private life. That statement just being issued by Lancashire Police. We'll have more reaction to that coming up. Also, Labour promising 13,000 new community police officers to help tackle knife crime and drug dealing. Well, this comes as the latest data reveals knife crime is 10 times higher than a decade ago. Can Labour be the new party of law and order? And the owners of British Gas, Centrica, making billions in profits from those soaring oil and gas prices, after, of course, the company was revealed to be installing prepayment meters forcefully into homes of vulnerable and disabled customers, reigniting the tax debate and whether the company should be profiting from the energy crisis. Let us know what you think, as ever, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And, of course, if you're north of the border, what do you think about Scottish politics and whether it's all heading south? Latest headlines now, though, with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon announced her unexpected decision to stand down. She plans to remain in office until her successor is elected. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for the leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, and Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes. The government has announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment. The new funding will be given to 151 councils in England to recruit more staff, improve recovery support for prison leavers and invest in addiction treatment. Ministers say the plans could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths every year. The Undersecretary for Primary Care and Public Health, Neil O'Brien, says it will also help cut crime. That's all we have for you for now. Let's get back to Mark.
Thank you very much indeed, Bethany. But let's update you with that breaking news. The family of missing mum, Nicola Bulley, saying they believe that the public focus has become distracted from finding Nikki and more about speculation, they said, and rumours into her private life. That statement just being issued via Lancashire Police, of course, who held that news conference yesterday when detectives said that the 45-year-old was being treated as vulnerable after having issues with alcohol linked to struggles with a menopause. Well, MPs have been amongst those criticising police for revealing those personal details. Nicola disappearing almost 3 weeks ago tomorrow, actually. Well, the Tory MP Elisa Kearns said it made her feel deeply uncomfortable. But Peter Faulding, of course, who'd been involved in the search using that sonar device with his diving team, saying that the police are not to blame. Well, let's actually update you, of course, on the latest in that the search has not actually resumed in terms of the river itself and the river bank, but we will be getting more reaction from Lancashire Police as it comes through. But let's reflect now on the seismic political events across the UK. Politicians assessing this new political reality after Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon resigned yesterday. A shock move indeed, no one expecting it. The First Minister receiving tributes now from across the political spectrum. The Prime Minister and Sir Keir Starmer both praising her for her public service for the people of Scotland. But now race to replace her as SNP leader already underway. The National Executive Committee meeting tonight, no less, to decide the timetable for that leadership election. The candidates expected to include Angus Robertson, also the Deputy First Minister John Swinney, a veteran, of course, who led the SNP between 2000 and 2004, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, currently on maternity leave, and the Health Secretary Humza Yousaf. But also this bigger question about what the party does now about Scottish independence. Well, joining us from Westminster, our political correspondent Tom Harwood. And Tom, we underline that we're speaking to at Westminster because, of course, Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, is the person who's actually raised the fact that the SNP party gathering due for next month may now have to be postponed and have to rethink the whole issue of independence and how they approach it.
Yes, and this gathering, which was really set up to rubber stamp Nicola Sturgeon's decision to use the next general election as a de facto proxy referendum, had come under some scrutiny behind the scenes within the SNP. It's thought that this is one of the reasons why Nicola Sturgeon was sort of losing a grip on her party. And actually, if we reflect on what happened here in Westminster towards the end of last year, we could sort of see an event that foreshadowed what happened at Bute House in Edinburgh yesterday. And that was the defenestration of Ian Blackford, the Westminster leader of the SNP, down here at the UK-wide Parliament, who was, of course, forced to resign by his group. And interestingly, Stephen Flynn replacing him, someone who is not a natural ally of Nicola Sturgeon, someone who comes from Aberdeenshire and is an MP up there, has been close to the oil and gas industry, for example, criticising openly Nicola Sturgeon's moves away from oil and gas and towards her Green Party partners in government in Holyrood. So we could see the beginnings of some splits there within the SNP over a range of issues, not just over leadership, but over tactics in terms of how to achieve independence, but also over gender issues as well. Joanna Cherry, another prominent MP down here in Westminster of the SNP, being very critical of Nicola Sturgeon's strategy towards Gender Recognition Act reform. And so all of those issues bubble together, and when we sort of look back with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps this resignation statement from Nicola Sturgeon yesterday doesn't seem so surprising after all. Perhaps it even seems inevitable.
The timing has clearly caught a lot of people on the hop, and even though this executive committee is meeting tonight, we've got an indication that they're sort of trying to work out what to do next, and not just choose the individual, but also, as we discussed, the political track forward.
Absolutely, and the process to choose that individual. I think they'll be looking very carefully at what other parties have done in recent history. Of course, we must remember that the SNP has not had a contested leadership election since 2004, a world away, a completely different political time, and a very different time for the SNP, when it was only a minor party, not even close to forming a government. It performed poorly in the 2004 European elections, and that's why there was that leadership contest that then returned Alex Salmond to the leadership of the party, and he went on to win, or at least come first, a plurality of seats in the 2007 Holyrood elections. But clearly we're in a very different political time, and it will be a very different structure of contest this time. They won't want to copy the Conservative Party with that long, protracted final stage of the process that we saw over the last summer. The Conservative Party nationally, that is, was criticised for talking to itself, was criticised for not engaging with the wider issues of the public, and perhaps they won't want to follow either the 2015 leadership election over the summer of that year for the Labour Party, which ended, of course, in the election of Jeremy Corbyn. The risk for the SNP now is that there will be a protracted process where there will be deep divisions within the party exposed for all to see, and various candidates have the potential now to tear chunks out of each other, yellow on yellow infighting, all while these individuals talk to a narrow selectorate within their own party to try and get that nomination, rather than talking to the Scottish people as a whole. That's the real risk for any party in government going through a leadership election, and frankly other parties in Scotland see this now as an opportunity, as a power vacuum is left by Nicola Sturgeon. No obvious, no immediate successor out of the many names that we are hearing floating around potentially to succeed her. No obvious successor, and there a risk for the SNP. Might its grip, its seemingly very tight, unassailable grip on Scottish politics that it's held since really 2015, might that now be beginning to slide away?
We do know, however, that Stephen Flynn is not going to stand for that leadership, despite leading the party there in Westminster. And we've also had Joanna Cherry, of course, an SNP MP, being quite critical, saying that the party now had to look at reform and healing. So, talking about these divisions, is there actually quite a divide between the SNP in Westminster and up in Edinburgh?
Well, that's one of the divides, but I think we shouldn't look over some of those other divides that are actually in Edinburgh as well. There are people closer to Nicola Sturgeon within her parliamentary caucus, but there are also people who have been very critical of her within Holyrood, within the Scottish Parliament. There were some SNP MPs who, of course, voted against Nicola Sturgeon when she came around with that Gender Recognition Act reform. Not a large number of SNP MPs, but a sizable minority voted against her. That was a very public division that not many people had expected. And also you see with people like Kate Forbes, the Treasury Secretary currently on maternity leave. Well, she's an evangelical Christian. She's made comments critical of abortion in the past. She's been said to have been critical of Nicola Sturgeon's stance on Gender Act reform. And so to that extent, that's a division as well. But also we can see further divisions, whether it's the individuals who are most mooted for the role. For example, Humza Yousaf has come under a great deal of scrutiny and criticism across the political spectrum for his handling of the Scottish NHS, particularly over this winter. He was criticised heavily at one point when he suggested people should think twice before calling an ambulance. So really, when we're looking across the spectrum of all of these people, whether it's Angus Robertson, who of course is Constitution Minister right now, he presided over the disastrous rollout of the Scottish census that had such a low return rate. They had to extend its rollout for much more time, costing £10 million to the Scottish taxpayer. None of these candidates look like they are shining and ideal, and that's what might make this coming leadership contest quite hairy.
Thank you to the shining and ideal Tom at Westminster. Thank you for that. But let's head now north of the border and find out how people are reacting to this and join our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire in Dumfries, because, Tony, clearly this is what we should describe as a Conservative area, and both Conservatives and Labour now trying to assess where they could pick up, particularly Labour, who believe there are, 10 to 15 seats available for them, really, if the SNP does collapse.
Yes, well, what I said yesterday, I think very much still stands. For the last 8 years, a vote for the SNP was in effect for a lot of people a vote for Nicola Sturgeon. Now that Nicola Sturgeon has been taken out of the equation, we're going to see more people in various authorities around Scotland question where their vote goes to now. The choice of candidates for the new SNP leader is going to be so varied that a lot of people will be wondering whether or not to hedge their bets on Labour or Conservatives. So we know that here in Dumfries, quite a Conservative area, has been around for quite a few elections now. Certainly the MSP seat, was held for the Scottish Conservatives by Oliver Mundell, and his father, David Mundell, was the MP for this area. So who's to say, but I must say, being here in Dumfries today, talking to the locals, it's been a bit of a back-to-school day for me today. Quite a lot of people here, showing their support and respect for Nicola Sturgeon and what she's done. But this is very much, for the people of Scotland, going to be a new chapter. Some will want to go in a different direction, and I reckon a lot of them will be living here in Dumfriesshire.
Thank you very much indeed for updating us with a picture there, of course, and we'll have more reaction from both north of the border and from London as, of course, the SNP Executive Committee meets tonight to decide that leadership list. Now, let's just reflect on the events of February the 6th, that 7.8 magnitude earthquake striking southern Turkey and northwest Syria, and the number of dead so far, 41,000 bodies, of course, still being recovered, and some 17 million people displaced, many survivors now injured and homeless. Well, in Britain, donations have been pouring in to help, especially those large Turkish populations, North London in particular. Ellie Costello has more details for us.
North London has the largest Turkish population in the UK. The community here has come together to send aid to people most devastated by the earthquake. ABS Transport is a logistics company that specialises in transporting goods between the UK and Turkey.
It was 3 in the morning when we got a call from one of our truck drivers who said, look, there's been a serious earthquake in the region. From 3 a.m. to 6 a.m, I remember it so clearly because we just sat there, complete silence, just in our heads thinking, what are we going to do? Our company's slogan is, let's lighten your load. So I just turned around and I said, let's lighten Turkey's load. And the whole thing has just unravelled itself, really.
Jeren was overwhelmed with donations, enough to help thousands of people. Many of the parcels were packed with care by local people.
This is one of those boxes that we've not touched. So they've put in crisps, marshmallows, there's pads in here, there's soups. Everything has been bought new. And a baby toy that might be useful. And I think what touched us the most was sending hugs on the card. And they've basically said, stay strong, love Zach.
Jeren's husband Abdullah is driving a convoy of 7 lorries from London to the heart of the disaster zone. The journey will take 4 days and will arrive today. Some of the team are already there, distributing supplies to those in need.
None of us were ever prepared for what we received. In those 24 hours, we only had 4 hours sleep. I'm not from the region, but my husband is. But I did say that I didn't think no one would be affected. I don't think there'd be an untouched person. And on Thursday, my cousin, who's the Consulate General in Iskenderun, who liaises between Syria and Turkey, has passed away.
Everyone working at ABS is Turkish, and Jeren says the news is affecting them all.
What's different with our office is that we were getting live updates from our own teams that are working out in Gaziantep saying we're washing dead. I'd say the word describing it as trauma or traumatised would be a good description as to how we are.
Construction experts believe the collapse of thousands of buildings in Turkey was preventable. Turkish officials have said that arrest warrants for more than 100 people have been issued for failing to follow building codes. Those arrested so far include building contractors.
I am very angry. I am very sad things because the government is nothing to do with the government. The councils there, they shouldn't allow the people to build the houses without the regulation.
For the team here, the focus is on aid parcels. It will be days before normal work here resumes. But for the millions of Turks and Syrians who survived the earthquake, it will be several months, perhaps years, before they can rebuild from the worst disaster in the region's modern history. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Of course, we'll keep updating you on the aid efforts. Also coming up with us here on GB News Live, the latest in the Nicola Bulley investigation. Just to update you in the breaking news, the Independent Office for Police Conduct have now just said they will make contact with Lancashire Police over the information that was made public in that news conference about Nicola Bulley yesterday. The statement from the IOPC saying, following information that was made public by Lancashire Constabulary yesterday, we have made contact with the force to determine if a referral to the IOPC may be required. More on that coming up. Let's update you on the weather right now.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Lots of cloud around today. The winds are going to be the big feature of the weather tonight and particularly tomorrow morning across parts of the north. We have Met Office yellow warnings in place. That's because of this area of low pressure deepening, intensifying as it moves to the north of Scotland. Look at the squeeze in the isobars. Those winds really picking up, especially through Friday morning. More on that in a moment. Let's get through the rest of today. As I said, a lot of cloud out there. Some drizzly conditions over parts of eastern England, clearing away, the odd spot of drizzle elsewhere, but also something a bit brighter developing. Parts of East Wales, northeast England may well see some sunny spells before more rain pushes back into Northern Ireland. It's pretty mild out there today, double digits almost across the board, and with a bit of brightness we could get into the teens.
During this evening, that rain is going to spread from Northern Ireland into western Scotland, where it will last all night. The rain getting heavier and heavier through the night as that low pressure moves in. The winds also then steadily increasing, really picking up after midnight across the northwest. Further south, well, it'll get a bit breezy. It stays cloudy. Look at these overnight temperatures, very mild indeed. We won't feel mild tomorrow in the winds. Now, those winds really whipping up tomorrow morning across Scotland initially, but also down across parts of northern England. Gusts of 60, 70 miles an hour, likely to cause some disruption, particularly for high-sided vehicles, but could all cause some flying debris, certainly some disruption to the transport networks. Planes, flights may be cancelled. So a very blustery day across the north with showers in the far north. Again, further south, many places just dry and cloudy, but it will be windier than today. And then we could at times see a little bit of rain in the southwest. Another very mild day across the south. Further north, it will be a colder day, despite a bit more sunshine, but obviously feeling a lot colder with those winds. Now, those winds will be easing through the afternoon and into the evening. A bit more rain coming into the northwest as we go through Friday evening. More details on the weather warnings on the Met Office website. Goodbye.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful. Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on this breaking news we're getting in the Nicola Bulley investigation. Her family have, in the past half hour, said they believe that the public focus has become distracted from finding Nikki and more about speculation and rumours into her private life. Well, that's coming after Lancashire police had said that the 45-year-old was suffering with alcohol-related issues and the effects of the menopause. And then, in the past few minutes, the Independent Office of Police Complaints has confirmed it's in contact with Lancashire Police, and this is concerning the information that was made public, of course, in that news conference of yesterday. Well, let's get more with Sophie Reaper, our Midlands correspondent there, who's been following these events. And Sophie, in terms of the family, first of all, I think that statement was issued through Lancashire Police, and then we had this Independent Office of Police Conduct coming in and saying, well, we're making contact with them as well.
Absolutely. This story is constantly moving. It was yesterday that we learned that when she went missing, Nicola had been graded as high risk because of specific vulnerabilities. We then found out what those vulnerabilities were, that she had had previous significant issues with alcohol as a result of the menopause. Now we've had a statement from Nicola's family responding to this. I'll read you a little bit of what they had to say. It's now been 3 weeks since Nikki went missing. We as a family believe that the public focus has become distracted from finding Nikki and more about speculation and rumours into her private life. As a family, we were aware that Lancashire Police last night released a statement with some personal details. Although we know that Nikki would not have wanted this, there are people out there threatening to sell stories about her. This is appalling and needs to stop. They also said in that statement about some other issues that Nicola had been suffering with as a result of perimenopause, so things like brain fog and restless sleep, which she was taking HRT, although they also confirmed they believe she'd stopped taking that medication, which, although she may have thought that was helping, they say it may have been what ended up causing this crisis. Then, as you say, in the last few moments, we've heard that the Independent Office for Police Conduct have been in touch with Lancashire Police. In a statement, they've said, following information that was made public by Lancashire Constabulary yesterday, we have made contact with the force to determine if a referral to the IOPC may be required. So the controversies just keep coming and coming here in Lancashire, but the big question that comes above them all is what has happened to Nicola Bulley.
The issue being that Lancashire Police put these details out there because they needed the public's help in actually perhaps tracing their movements if they were in the area, had they seen any sightings, and of course that's engaged the public. And just that bridge behind you, of course, a number of yellow ribbons that have been tied there in remembering her.
Absolutely. The public have been integral in this investigation, and the police really reinforced yesterday exactly how grateful they are for the public's support. But of course, there's a fine line between the support that the public have been giving and then those people who are taking it to the next step and carrying out what they believe are their own investigations, armchair detectives, which the police are trying to deter. As they say, all it's going to do is derail their investigation.
Sophie, our North West of England reporter, updating us there in Lancashire, and thanks for that. We'll get back to you, of course, as more details emerge on the investigation. But just to remind you, IOPC saying they've contacted Lancashire Police to see if they need a referral after those events. Now, business news. British gas owner Centrica reporting soaring underlying annual profits, some £2.8 billion, up from £392 million in 2021. But despite all our households struggling with gas and electric bills, Centrica's boss, Chris O'Shea, so far refusing to reveal whether he'll be waiving his bonus. Well, joining us now, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. And Liam, what we do know is that Centrica has announced a £300 million share buyback, and it's got its dividend. I think I'm just going to interrupt us because we've got news coming in with King Charles. These pictures, I think, just coming in Milton Keynes. Yes, there is the Royal Motorcade just arriving, and this is His Majesty arriving with, I think, the Queen Consort, with Milton Keynes, of course, having achieved city status in this particular year. So a huge crowd there gathering to greet the King with flags and flowers. I think there may be daffodils. Yes, I think they are daffodils, which, of course, as a former Prince of Wales, will be very welcome. No longer Prince of Wales, of course, that is William now. But the King showing his usual relaxed approach with the crowds and greeting people and talking to them with the pictures, as ever, with the camera phones there held high.
It's interesting, Mark, that Milton Keynes has city status because it is, of course, one of the archetypal new towns.
Yeah.
The series of towns built in Britain in the 50s and the 60s. Milton Keynes has often been derided by bien-pensant commentators, but surveys show, in terms of happiness, there is no happier place in the UK. And also, Milton Keynes, I've written about this in my book on housing, has the highest share of entrepreneurs per head of any place in Britain.
Indeed, I do remember going to film with the Stewart Formula One team, Jackie Stewart's Formula One Grand Prix team up there, who'd based themselves there. I do have to say the series of roundabouts to actually get there is something else again. So obviously the Royal Motorcade would have been navigating that. But, I mean, this was, you know, part of going back to, as you say, the new towns post-war, that sort of entrepreneurial spirit in Britain.
That's right. I mean, you know, Harlow, Stevenage, Corby in the Midlands. We haven't built a new town in my lifetime, Mark, and I was born in 1969. Milton Keynes was pretty much the last one that we built. And an awful lot of people in Parliament, they don't like to talk about it, but they think ultimately the solution to our housing crisis isn't sort of infill, isn't ramming new build houses on the edge of English villages. The solution is actually building a few new towns, because often the infrastructure, or expanding the existing new towns, often the infrastructure's there, they're in places that make sense logically, commercially. And have got good transport links, as Milton Keynes. Indeed. I should actually just update you. I don't think the Queen Consort is there. It's seemingly King Charles on his own at the moment. We were being told that she had a seasonal illness. Quite what that was, we don't know, but clearly the Queen Consort unable to join us there. There were some protesters there in the background. I think we understand they are Republican supporters, but I think, yes, not my king. Well, I'm afraid he is. Well, maybe not technically until the coronation. I'm not quite sure on that. However, that is quite a substantial crowd of demonstrators there making their protest. It has been the case, of course, that we've seen eggs thrown at various other appearances, but they are being well held back there by that barrier. And clearly, with this having been announced, I think, on Twitter, the police and special branch will be ensuring that things are monitored. Well, there we are. You can see the police there with their helmets in the front there. And despite the protest, the Union flag still being waved. And an Italian flag there in the background. Oh, well spotted. Yes. Well, that's, you know, quite right for every new town to have an Italian cafe. Or is it? Or is it? No, I don't think it is. South African, maybe? I don't know. Can't quite see that in the distance. However, all nations there celebrating this, and we've got some orange-clad and safety helmets behind there with, I guess, Yes, there we go. We've got the barriers at the end. So I think we can just see some more meeting and greeting. It's interesting that despite all these alerts about the safety, the King clearly is absolutely intent on meeting people and having words with them, and in quite a relaxed way. I think that's, whatever you think of King Charles, I still can't say that phrase. It's still odd, isn't it? It still is odd. I heard the national anthem for the first time with God Save the King the other day, and again, it didn't quite scan in my mind. I guess we're getting old, Mark. But it's always been he's always been very willing, keen, almost going beyond the advice of his security detail to make physical contact with the public. And the smile on his face there as a result, of course. But anyway, let's stay with us. We'll have the latest live from Milton Keynes, and it's not often we say that, but we'll be back there shortly. Let's get an update on the bulletin now with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:34. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom, and we'll start with some breaking news. The family of missing Nicola Bulley says the public focus has become distracted from finding her and is more about speculation into her private life. Yesterday, detectives said the 45-year-old was vulnerable and that she struggled with alcohol and the menopause. Lancashire Police is facing backlash for revealing such personal details about the mother of two who disappeared almost 3 weeks ago. And in the last few minutes, the Independent Office for Police Conduct has made contact with the force to determine if a referral for an inquiry is needed. The search for a new First Minister of Scotland is underway after Nicola Sturgeon announced her unexpected resignation. The SNP's Executive Committee will meet this evening to draw up a timetable for a leadership race. Possible replacements include the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, and Culture and External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson. And the government has announced an extra £421 million to boost alcohol and drug treatment. The new funding will be given to 151 councils in England to recruit more staff, improve recovery support for prison leavers and invest in addiction treatment. Ministers say the plans could prevent nearly 1,000 drug-related deaths every year. The Undersecretary for Primary Care and Public Health, Neil O'Brien, says it will also help cut crime.
We know that drug addiction drives so much crime. It drives about half of all crime. And because we know that if people get into drug treatment, that radically reduces their likelihood that they will be out there causing chaos and causing crime. And so we're making this big investment that will mean more people in treatment, new types of treatment. And as well as being good for all the rest of us and cutting crime, of course it's a path out of terrible, terrible addiction for people who are trapped in it.
You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Mark will be back with you in just a moment.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, let's head back to that rather big gas, not bill, but gas profit figure, because British Gas's owners Centrica reporting profits of some £2.8 billion, underlying profit figure that is, up from £392 million last year. So the question yet again, is it right they're benefiting when many others can't pay their electricity or gas bill? And of course, what happens about the windfall tax? Well, Liam is still with us with On the Money to address this perennial question when we get these figures reported. Interesting, we're just seeing what Chris O'Shea, the chief executive, is saying, that it will help the company to keep bills lower for customers and invest in the green transition. But inevitably, profits angering a lot of green campaigners.
Since these numbers came out this morning, Mark, for Centrica and its subsidiary British Gas, the political heat, if you will, has been rising. Let's just have a quick look, see what I did there, at the figures. Now, the operating profits, this is the widest definition of profit, £3.3 billion there, 3,300 million in 2022, up from 948 million last year. If you then strip out the one-off money that Centrica made from selling some businesses called Spirit Energy, you get to the underlying profits. That's the figure that you cited, Mark, 2.8 billion there, 2,800 million, up from 392 million. But, and it's an important but, Centrica's the downstream company that actually drills the stuff out of the North Sea, the oil and gas. The company that actually faces the customers and sends you those direct debit bills is British Gas itself. And British Gas actually made less money in 2022 than 2021. Profits down from 118 million to 72 million. Having said that, you know, some people will say, oh, that's just an accounting phenomenon. It's all one company, really. That's a complicated question. It kind of is and it isn't. But clearly the political heat is rising, not least with calls for the chief exec, Chris O'Shea, to at least waive his bonus.
Yeah, and of course, because they had that disastrous public relations gaffe of sending in a third-party company to forcibly install prepayment meters on the most vulnerable customers, which, you know, Ofgem has said, you know, let's put a stop to this.
You know, I'm not taking anything away from the journalists at the Times who did that sting. You know, we're from a different stable than the Times, but fair dues. It was a good piece of journalism, and in journalism, timing is often everything. You know, it's not unusual for companies to install prepayment meters where households have a bad credit record. That goes on anyway. Yeah. It's just to expose it and reveal it now in all its human anguish when so many people are struggling to pay their bills and some of the underlying companies are making massive profits is, of course, hugely in the public interest.
Especially when they're sort of using locksmiths and so on. But there's one more interesting thing here that Chris O'Shea has been talking about in terms of, you know, the green issues. And the profit overwhelmingly is saying coming from Centrica's nuclear power plants, as well as its energy trading arms. I mean, this is something perhaps people don't realise.
Yeah, Centrica is a multifaceted energy company. It doesn't just have contracts to drill in the North Sea. And on that part of its profits, it will pay the windfall tax. That's a 60% tax, up from the 40% supplementary tax, which upstream oil and gas companies pay when they drill in the North Sea. But of course, they make money from nuclear too, because there's been huge demands on nuclear because we've been using less gas. From Russia. I think it's also worth saying that the trade unions are getting their teeth into this situation. Sharon Graham, who is, of course, the General Secretary of Unite, one of the biggest unions, she said British gas owner Centrica has been coining it from our massive energy bills while sending bailiffs to prey on vulnerable consumers. That story you referred to, Mark. The length and breadth of the country. These energy companies are showing us everything that is wrong with the UK's broken economy. Centrica, of course, would deny that. But what they can't deny is that there will be more and more pressure on the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, when he stands up and gives his spring budget on March the 15th to counter some of these profits. Particularly if they still have lots of ongoing industrial relations issues that have yet to be resolved, that need cash to resolve them.
And especially because, as you've indicated as well, that ceiling will be going higher from April onwards in terms of the price cap.
You know, this is going to be really, really difficult for politicians to explain. The energy price cap that caps the average bill, they cap the unit cost. So a household with average usage, that cap will go up from £2,500 a year to £3,000 at a time when wholesale energy prices have been coming down for many months. And I think what's been neglected, Mark, is the fact that on that day, in April, when that price cap changes, there are thousands and thousands of businesses that will lose all government support whatsoever on their energy bills, not least many, many manufacturing firms
who use a lot of energy
across the red wall, those marginal seats. It's going to be a very tough budget statement on March the 15th.
And, of course, we'll have all the latest for you live here on GB News on that day. But let's hear now from Natasha Fielding, who is head of gas pricing at Argus Media. And, Natasha, just to follow on what Liam was saying, the TUC, General Secretary Paul Novak, saying the energy market in Britain is broken. Do you agree with him?
I think that is quite a strong term. What I would say is that actually energy market prices have come down a lot in recent months, showing that possibly the worst of the energy crisis is over. And that is partly reflecting the energy market functioning. So, really high gas prices last year, while very painful for households, they ensured that supply to Europe, gas supply, was strong enough. LNG, liquefied natural gas deliveries to Europe climbed, and that meant that storage sites could be filled, which really allowed Europe to balance its gas market over the past winter.
The problem for these companies when they're trying to explain away, if that's the right phrase, these profits, because wherever they are, however they operate, the price is actually set, if you like, by the international market. And therefore, if everyone's making the money, so do you. Well, I'm afraid we've lost Natasha there, which is unfortunate, because I was just going to ask her about whether, in fact, there is an explanation for why all these companies are making so much money. No, I think we have actually lost our link to Natasha Fielding. However, I think she was about to say, obviously, that the aspect is that the international regulators have seen hundreds of millions in profits because of, obviously, what's happened in Ukraine and the wholesale price, therefore. But we'll update as we get more reaction. Inevitably, of course, you've been reacting to all these stories breaking today, particularly perhaps your gas bill as it comes through the letterbox. Don't forget, you can let us know at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Dennis has been in touch, reflecting on what we were talking about with knife crime and that particular issue earlier. He says the justice system is completely broken and not fit for purpose. We need to be tough on crime and have zero tolerance for weapons such as knives. I think a minimum of 5 years jail for those carrying a knife, but that's rarely given. What would be a proper deterrence for carrying a knife, he asks. Kenny now on the similar issue, saying, why do we need 13,000 more PCSOs when they're unable to arrest anyone or target violent crimes? This is, of course, the approach suggested by Labour in terms of what they would do if they came into power. He's gone on to say we need more actual police officers. This wouldn't be within Labour's wasting taxpayers' money because, of course, they have the powers of arrest. Julie from Shropshire has been in touch to say, isn't it about time a government minister explained what they're going to do about the excessive profits of the energy companies, which, of course, we've just been discussing. We face another possibility of a hike in the price cap in April, as Liam was indicating there. No one seems to care that ordinary people are being fleeced, she says. And, of course, as we say, there'll be more reaction coming. But in terms of Centrica, they're basically saying that they will be helping customers with lower bills and reinvesting that money in what they call is a green transition. Chris O'Shea, the chief executive, saying he will help both customers and the environment, but reflecting that the profits basically from the parent company rather than British Gas itself, which actually saw a fall in their profit figure. Now, let's return to the breaking news on the Nicola Bulley investigation. Just to remind you, in the past hour, her family releasing a statement to say the public's focus on rumours and speculation about her private life was distracting from the search for the 45-year-old mother. Yesterday, Lancashire Police, of course, saying she'd suffered with significant issues with alcohol after ongoing struggles with the menopause. Well, Lancashire Police have been facing criticism and indeed the independent office now of police conduct in contact with them. Let's speak now to Dr. Charlotte Proudman, who's a barrister and director of Rights to Equality. Charlotte, thank you very much for your time. Clearly, there are issues of police procedure and then issues, I guess, of what, personal confidentiality?
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. What we've seen is really quite serious issues concerning Nicola Bulley's private life being disclosed to the entire world for them to further speculate on. So if the police's intention was to provide this information about her being menopausal and having alcohol issues to result in a reduction in speculation, in fact, it's clearly had the opposite effect. I mean, it seems to me to have been a serious error of judgment by the police, because what didn't accompany their statement was any acknowledgement or understanding about why this information was relevant to the investigation into her disappearance. So what we have is private information disclosed about her with no real understanding about why this information is even being shared with the public at all. And what the family statement says, it seems to me to be quite distressing in nature. The idea that people are trying to sell stories about Nicola Bulley at a time when she's disappeared. She's a mother of two. She's clearly a partner of a man who's also very worried about her. And yet the focus is upon, gaining information, titillation, entertainment, gossip about her private life. I really do despair at the state of humanity.
Should one reflect that Lancashire Police, of course, as every other police forces in these circumstances, have to employ the public in terms of what they may have seen, what they may have encountered, their eyes and ears, if you like, out on the ground. And I'm just looking at the statement you referred to from the family, just to remind people, as a family, we were aware beforehand that Lancashire Police last night released a statement with some personal details about our Nikki. Although we know that Nikki would not have wanted this, there are people out there speculating and threatening to sell stories about her. This is appalling and needs to stop. So for that reason, perhaps, Lancashire Police quite rightly took that decision to put the correct information out there.
We just don't know, and I don't want to speculate any further. But why is it that the media would give money to people to sell stories about her private life? I mean, I asked the question, I suppose, in a flippant manner, what is wrong with people? This is a woman who apparently has vulnerabilities, who's gone missing, and people are trying to cash in on her disappearance to share information about her menopause or apparently alcohol issues, which bears, as I say, seems to me no relevance to a disappearance at all.
Yeah, I think we should point out that the phrasing is threatening to sell stories about her. We don't actually know if any media outlet has actually paid money or has actually engaged in any kind of contractual buying the tittle-tattle, as you say. But it does leave the police in a really difficult position, doesn't it? I mean, I know we've got the independent office, the IOPC, looking at it now, but where would the police go next without trying to actually engage the public in the process?
I mean, absolutely, engage the public in the process where the police think that's necessary. No doubt they'll follow their own procedures when it comes to that. But I think we need to be really careful about information which is disclosed regarding her private life that could lead, and it may not be the intention of the police, but could lead to victim blaming, stereotypes, tropes and myths playing out about women who go missing. And in other cases where women have been murdered or even raped, we see similar stereotypes and tropes played out about them. So the idea that somehow she has alcohol issues therefore feeds into a narrative that she might be responsible or blameworthy for her own disappearance. That may not be the intention of the police. In fact, I'm sure it's not. But it's the way in which the public and the media misconstrue that. Yeah. And then we see that play out within tabloid headlines, which then furthers that vitriol associated with Nicola Bulley.
Yeah, and of course feeds on itself as a result of that. Yeah. Charlotte Proudman, Barrister, Director of Right to Equality, thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News with that. Thank you. Let's just return now to a royal visit to Milton Keynes, which has been bestowed city status. King Charles arrived there a little while ago to celebrate that new status, granted in May. As part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, the title to be officially bestowed in a special ceremony shortly. Well, we can cross now to Milton Keynes and speak with our royal reporter Cameron Walker. So is it actually a city yet, or is about that to happen officially?
Well, he's celebrating the city status, Mark, of Milton Keynes. As you said, it was a title bestowed on the city as part of the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebration.
Cameron, I'm just going to interrupt you. We've got a lot of interference with wind on your microphone. I don't know if perhaps we can just get the microphone a little nearer to you. I know it's a blustery day there, but we're just obviously discussing when it actually technically becomes a city.
Yes, indeed, Mark. I'm going to assume this is better unless you tell me otherwise. But yes, but for Milton Keynes, it's all about diversity. We're told 140 separate languages are spoken in Milton Keynes schools. But before His Majesty arrived here at the Church of Christ, the Cornerstone, which is one of the first ecumenical churches in the city, which means lots of different fractions of the Christian community come together as part of one big community here. There are several hundred people in this crowd, or at least they were when the King arrived, and they were very, very much supportive of him. And the reason I'm saying that is because there are a small number of protesters here from the anti-monarchy group Republic. I think around between 15 and 20 people. And when they shouted at the King as he got out the car, there were overwhelming chants of "God save the King" and cheers. So it was a very small minority of protesters here. But inside the church, the King is going to be meeting representatives from many different community groups here in Milton Keynes, including Bletchley Park, of course, the famous World War II Codebreakers, which is now a museum just outside of the city, which draws tourists from across the world, really, providing a boost to the local economy. He's also going to be meeting a local theatre group, as well as a robot delivery business. You may have seen videos, actually, of the little carts which go along the streets here in Milton Keynes. It's all about getting young people involved in STEM, science and technology and maths in the city as well. He's expected to be there in around 45 minutes or so, but the King appeared pretty much unbothered, I think, by some of the protests here. It's very much him celebrating Milton Keynes becoming a city as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, keeping calm and carrying on, Mark.
Indeed. And very quickly, Cameron, no sign of the Queen Consort. We understand maybe she's still suffering with that winter illness that they revealed.
Yes, exactly, Mark. We're told that we know that the Queen Consort has contracted coronavirus. It's something Buckingham Palace confirmed earlier this week, which meant she had to cancel all of her engagements this week. I've heard from a royal source that Her Majesty is incredibly disappointed, more than anything else, that she's having to let people down at the last minute. But no doubt she'll be back up on full form next week, as far as we understand this. And the fact that the King is still shows, I think, that it's very much just a small seasonal illness, like as everybody suffers.
Indeed. Cameron, in the windy city of Milton Keynes, thank you very much indeed for updating us. More, of course, as that official naming ceremony takes place, city status being bestowed. Well, that's it from us for now. Just to remind you, Andrew is with you to look after you at 12 till 2 tomorrow, but Patrick coming up with you next, and we'll have all the very latest, of course, on that Nicola Bulley story. Stay with us on GB News.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday